Okay, well, welcome once again those in the room, and welcome those who've joined us on the stream to this emergency savings event. It's great to have so many of you with us, both in person and hopefully following along at home. We do really want this to be an interactive event, so whether you're at home or here at One Birdcage Walk, you can put your questions to our speakers by using slido.com and entering hashtag emergency savings summit. We will also have a roving mic in the room for questions here for people who want to ask them. You can also join in on social media if you're so inclined, and again, we're using the hashtag Emergency Savings Summit. Finally, if you do find on the stream that you're having any issues, please email insight@nestcorporation.org.uk and we'll do our best to help with any issues that people at home are having. Today's sessions will also be made available as recordings, so if there are any issues, you should still be able to catch them up at a later date. Okay, so next from me, just a few thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to our partners and our collaborators on the Emergency Savings Programme. That's all the employers and the savings partners who are making the trials possible, the academic team led by Sarah Holmes-Burke and David Laibson at Harvard and their colleagues, and of course our funders, the JP Morgan Foundation, who were the first funder to come on board with the emergency savings work, the Money and Pension Service, who joined them and have subsequently supported some of our own thinking around opt-out savings models. And then BlackRock, who, since they joined onto the Sidecar trial, have expanded their support to cover our opt-out trials, and now a broader programme of work on emergency savings and broader wealth building, which we're really excited to get started. BlackRock's support has also made today's event possible, so we're very grateful for that. Many of you will know that we set Nest Insight up back in 2016 as a public benefit programme within Nest, but with a degree of independence day to day to enable us to focus on a more holistic and longer term set of issues that face our target market in building towards an adequate income in retirement. All of the work that we do is possible because of the partnerships we build, especially those funding partnerships, so we're hugely grateful for the support that those organisations give us. I also want to say a big thank you today to the Nest Insight team who put today's event together. I'm sure many of you will appreciate that a huge amount of work goes into making an event like today happen, not to mention into the research programme that we're going to be talking about a lot throughout the course of the day. For today specifically, we've faced a number of novel and unique challenges in addition to the now standard COVID issues that everyone's increasingly used to deal with, highlighted earlier towards the back end of last week by discovering that 40 bagpipers had taken up rehearsal space outside the window of the room we were supposed to be using, which led to a last-minute change of room, and I'm sure some of you would have seen various of the other disruptions that have been going on around the outside. So we have had to deal with a few things. The team have taken these in absolutely remarkable good grace, so we ask that you do the same and bear with us if there are any kind of hitches today. There may be, but I'm sure we'll be able to push through them, whether they be bagpipe related or otherwise. So Nest Insight's been interested in the area of workplace savings and emergency savings for a number of years, really, almost since our launch in 2016. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of our thinking in this space later on, as will some of my colleagues through the day, but for now I'm just going to stick to a couple of initial thoughts. The first of which is just, in case we're not clear, that helping people to save for the short term has a large number of profoundly positive effects. Yes, it helps their financial resilience and well-being today, but it's also a really important platform for greater financial well-being in the long term and as a basis for people to save for retirement. And in many ways, this has never seemed kind of more relevant than now in the aftermath of the pandemic and with people facing a number of very real financial pressures day to day. We've already learned a huge amount from our work in this area and also from the work of others. So we know that many employers are interested in offering workplace savings tools to their employees. We know that many employees are interested in being offered them, and we know increasingly that for those who do use them, they use them in a number of different ways, but that all of those ways in which they use them seem to benefit those people in terms of their financial health. But we also know there are some hurdles to employers implementing these tools in practice, and crucially that there's an intention behaviour gap in terms of take-up. So a variety of approaches that we've tried and that others have tried have explored ways of increasing take-up of voluntary workplace savings programmes, and we know that take-up tends to remain pretty low in almost all cases, except under very specific and often quite hard to replicate conditions, for example, where there's a more generous upfront financial match of some kind, or perhaps in the case of credit unions where taking up a savings product is linked to access to borrowing tools. So kind of where those conditions aren't met, it's pretty hard to actually get people to take up these programs, even where they self-identify as perhaps wanting them or feeling like they would benefit from them. So those are some of the themes we're going to focus in on today. Our first panel is going to explore the evidence to date, both here and in the US, and shine a light on some case studies for things that are already working well. And then in our second panel, we're going to focus on scalability, hearing from employers, providers, and wider experts in this space about what needs to happen to support the adoption of workplace savings programs, and especially auto-save approaches at scale. But first, we're very lucky to have the Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion with us today. He's taken a really close interest in this topic and been a huge supporter of our research, for which we're extremely grateful. And we're particularly lucky to have him here today because it's his birthday, so happy birthday, Minister. Grateful that you've managed to find time today to join us for a chunk of the day. And on that note, happy to hand over to you and to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Obviously, when this was set up, I said what I really like to do on my birthday would be to come and spend the day with your good selves. And originally, I was scheduled, if you saw the original draft, to allow you all to chat, and I would then toddle in at about 4 o'clock. I'd have missed the entire sessions, and I would have then told you how brilliant I am and government is, and have learnt nothing whatsoever, and that would have been a disaster. So my apologies that the original schedule looked pretty bad. I've totally reversed it. We've jigged the diary around. So you've got a lot more of me listening and asking stupid questions today, because I hope today is a day of learning. And this arises out of a discussion that I had with a number of people from Nest and various others and various conferences I did in 2021, where it was patently clear, as it is patently clear to all of us, and you'll hear all the stats when everybody gives all their respective stats, that there is a massive and real issue as to ongoing lack of rainy day savings. Now, if that wasn't a problem pre-pandemic, it sure as hell is a problem post-pandemic. And if it wasn't a problem post-pandemic, as we enter a cost of living difficulty at the very least, crisis if it really goes wrong, if this, if the war keeps going and all the complications continue, then things are going to get very, very, very difficult for some people. And the lack of savings is something that will really, really affect them. So it seemed to me that it would be a very good idea to get everybody in a room who is the great and the good in this space, and to try and collectively improve our understanding, our knowledge, and to drive forward best practice. So that is what I regard as the purpose of this. I have a very beautiful speech written by my officials that I'm not going to deliver, as you can see, because it seems to me that the main purpose of a minister and several of the department people being here today is to try and learn and shape policy going forward. And I know there's some Treasury colleagues here as well. And between myself and John Glenn, who sits in the building over there, sort of obviously just the other side of some bagpipers, we are in a position that the two of us run the Financial Inclusion Forum and have run that for now 4 years to try and drive forward improvements in this space, whether that is taking on high-cost credit, whether it is reforming mid-cost credit. I'm delighted to say driving the likes of Wonga out of business, and affecting people like Brighttribe as well, but also trying to finance organisations like Fair for All, who I know are here today. So we've done that through dormant assets, and we've developed policies to try and get into this space to try and improve it. My background on this, and I should do a disclosure, and one of the reasons that there is certain restrictions on what I can do as a minister, is that so I got this job in 2010 as MP for Hexham. Before that, I ran a business. I was a lawyer for 20 years. And I was a very fat jockey, as you can now tell. A steeplechase jockey, obviously, a cart horse, most people then describe it. But the long and the short of it is that the first surgery I ever had was with a constituent who came to me and explained that their overdraft had been dramatically reduced by one of the high street banks, who shall remain nameless, Barclays, and who was in circumstances that overdraft had been reduced in the middle of a recession. Obviously 2009-10 was a very tough time, and they were actually trading perfectly properly. But because their overdraft had been reduced, they were effectively being pushed out of business. Because instead of having a normal trading regime, but because their overdraft had gone from 100,000 down to 20,000 in a matter of months, they were effectively unable to trade, and shortly thereafter they went under. And 32 nice people in Hexham lost their job. And the consequence of that is, and at the same stage, various banks, Barclays, Lloyds, HSB, Midland, NatWest, all of you, actually then closed lots of branches in Northumberland, which, seeing as it's the biggest constituency in the country with many more sheep than voters, then it did seem to me something to try and get into this space. So you're going to hear from the lovely Lauren Langton later on, with whom I set up a bank called the Tynedale Community Bank, and then subsequently that morphed into the Northumberland Community Bank, specifically to try and provide savings and loans in this particular space. The other disclosure I've got to give, particularly as our Treasury colleagues here, is that my entire life savings, which is not that much, I hasten to add, is in a bank called Atom Bank, which I helped set up in 2014-15, which is a northeast-based bank, which is an internet-only bank. And myself and a nice man called Anthony Thompson, who set up Metro as well, sat down and tried to create this, and it's still going to this day. I'm not involved with either anymore, you'll be pleased to know, which is one of the reasons they're doing so well. So, what are we trying to do in this space? First of all, I think it's a genuine, listen and learn day for me. But the main bit, obviously we support what Nest is trying to do. I should just make one point on Nest and what Will said, is that this is the second Nest event I've done in the last 3 weeks. And his intro was an awful lot better than the previous Nest event, which I did, where those of you who were there heard one of the very senior executives at Nest say, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nest event. I need to do some housekeeping. The toilets are outside," pointing to the grass area. Which was a little surprise to some of the ladies in particular. The gentlemen thought, okay, well, I've done this before. But you can imagine that certain women were going, I really don't want to go for a wee out there. So I had to clarify that the Nest event was not minus any toilets whatsoever. So it was a much better, impressive presentation than the previous one. The practical reality, though, is that Nest are actually doing great work in this space. And there is a lot of insight and learning. I wouldn't say that they're telling us anything that isn't sort of rocket science and reinventing the wheel. But there is a lot of learning that we can take away from this. And it is, I think the discussion today will be, where you have a great product, how do you incentivize people to take it up as a voluntary basis? That is extraordinarily difficult. Unless you've got incredible ties to a community, and because you've got really, which obviously what credit unions do very, very successfully. And that is one of the problems with sidecar savings. It's clearly an amazing product, but it requires people to opt into that. Where you have a captive audience, automatic enrollment is the best example of a captive audience, employees who are part of a payroll saving deduction scheme, clearly you have an amazing take-up. And then there are certain products in the middle. The Treasury colleagues would say things like the LISA is an amazing product, massively subsidized, but the truth is very few people take it up. And so how do we get into that space? Who is doing it well? And how do we genuinely transform that? I've tried to gently nudge, cajole, persuade, not blackmail, but certainly name and shame, the FTSE 100. And I wrote to every single chief executive of the FTSE 100 last year to try and say to them, what are you doing in this space? What payroll savings are you doing? The answer to that is pretty limited. So whilst I applaud the things that certain organisations are doing, my big plea as well is that all of you have a really important role to play. Because you can hold large organisations, the FTSE 100, if you're a pension scheme trustee, if you are involved with these, BlackRock is a really great example, then you kind of got to be saying, well, what are you doing in this space and why not? Because if you want to do one thing to improve the outcomes for your staff and also how you are perceived as a company, this is an amazing thing, offering a payroll saving scheme, a rainy day saving scheme. And you'd be stunned and amazed by how few are doing it. And yet, they will do things very lovely, which would be like a double pension contribution, which they then say this is an amazing thing. The difficulty is the double pension contribution, whilst it is an amazing thing, is of zero use whatsoever when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're really short of cash. And that is the bit that we need to try and flip and change. So, I had a beautiful speech, I promise you. But for me, this isn't about emergency savings. Because emergency savings, I did say to somebody that when they were saying that the topic was emergency savings, it did imply that Nest was in desperate trouble. And that we were going to be asked, do they need a emergency savings to keep Nest going? So that's not how I see it. What I see this is rainy day savings. And this is how do you get people to a situation that they can cope with the shocks that we know are out there, and my lordy, we're going to have to navigate in 2022, 2023. That is the objective, and I look forward to learning and listening a lot today. I just want to finish on one thing, is that I have to dash off, because There's nothing happening in Parliament, but I'm going to stay for both the 2 sessions and then see where we go. But I've got lots of officials here who are way brighter than me. All right, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Minister. That was absolutely fantastic framing for the day ahead, and I hope that the rest of the day lives up to your the objectives that you set for it. I'm relieved I exceeded the bar that Mark set for me last week on the housekeeping, and I'm also relieved to be able to say that Nest is thankfully not in desperate trouble, just for the avoidance of doubt. So that's all good. And with that, we're going to move on to the first panel of the day. So I'm going to hand over to our panel chair, Gemma Gooch. Gemma is the co-head of Global Social Impact at BlackRock, and therefore one of our close collaborators on this work. So over to you, Gemma, to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Will, and good afternoon, everybody. And I must say thank you as well to the Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion, both for your remarks, but also the fact that you're here to stay and you've rescheduled your day, your birthday indeed, around this profoundly important topic. It really reflects your continued dedication to financial well-being for people across the UK. So thank you. I co-manage social impact at BlackRock, as Will already mentioned, which is the firm's philanthropic arm. Our team also manages the BlackRock Foundation, which was set up in early 2020 with two main objectives. One, to help more people build financial security, and the other objective, to help more people benefit from the low carbon transition. You might be wondering what our philanthropic interest is in this particular topic around emergency savings. Well, our core business is around helping more people save for the long term. But the long term can feel pretty distant for most people when they're facing economic uncertainty in the very near term. And the needs are only more acute given the pandemic and the cost of living crisis that we're already facing currently. A great school friend of mine's story, I think, really reflects that of so many people in the UK. She's a single mum, recently became single just before the pandemic hit. She works for a charity. She's been in and out of furlough for the last couple of years with a really volatile income. We've had many discussions around actually helping her manage her finances on a weekly basis. And actually, every week seems to come with an unexpected expense, not an emergency, as you so quite rightly mentioned. So for her, an unexpected expense would be simply a bathroom leak, the car breaking down, or in fact, her friends and her children, rather, growing up and growing into new clothing sizes on a continual basis. So she's simply unable to entertain a conversation around the long term when she's faced with that near-term stress. There's now a wide evidence base to show that people who are indebted, they have people who have a volatile income or a low income, or in fact have very little long-term retirement, short-term savings in place of emergency, are less likely to save for retirement. And that's why at BlackRock we launched in 2019 a multi-year philanthropic commitment to really further charitable grant funding to non-profits who are uniquely positioned to address this real gap in the savings spectrum. And that's why we partnered with Nest Insight, who we really admired given their cutting-edge research on pensions and auto-enrolment, along with 3 emergency savings initiative partners in the US. Tim Flack, who represents Commonwealth, are one of our partners in the US, alongside Common Sense Lab and also the Financial Health Network. Nest Insight has really continued to drive progress to help those struggling and squeezed populations in the UK build that financial safety net that is so crucial to long-term financial well-being. We're really proud of what our partners have accomplished so far. We're really optimistic about what also lies ahead as we continue to pilot new programs together, build the research that is needed and those innovations to really help scale up emergency savings. I'm really pleased to say that we're renewing and building on our partnership with Nest Insight for the years to come to continue that vital work. So to our panel today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by 5 esteemed experts who share the same role of helping really keep this system going and creating a widely adopted payroll savings solution. And they will help me answer the question today at hand: what works in encouraging saver participation? First, we will hear around the evidence base. So we'll hear from the US, first of all, with Tim. Then we'll go to Roxana from the Money and Pension Service, and Joe, who will present the breadth of the evidence landscape. And then lastly, we'll hear from Michelle and Ian around some real-life case studies, and particularly around the AutoSave trials. So introducing each in turn, we have Tim Flack, who is the Executive Director of Commonwealth. As I said, they're one of our emergency savings partners in the US, and they're a mission-based US nonprofit, really helping vulnerable populations in the US build financial security. Big kudos to Tim, who flew in last night from the States, so I imagine he might need an extra glass of coffee halfway through this session. Roxana Prisikaru, who is an evaluation manager at the Money and Pension Service, and she leads research, evaluation and strategy for the What Works Fund set up by the government, as well as your evaluation lead for the Financial Capability Lab, which is a collaboration with a number of financial services organisations. Jo Phillips probably needs no more introduction to you. She's Director of Research and Innovation at Nest Insight, and I'm sure you know her work in the implementation and also evaluation of the 2 workplace savings trials, both Sidecar Savings and now AutoSave. Michelle Sutton is the Head of Compensation and Reward at Suez Recycling and Recovery, and you have overcome significant barriers to launching a new AutoSave trial last November for your new joiners. And lastly, but no means least, Ian Hodson, who is Head of Reward and Deputy Director for HR at the University of Lincoln. Ian and his team are trialling yet again a very unique AutoSave trial with their student employee population. So let us begin with Tim. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in the US, Tim, and learnings that we can take here in the UK?
Absolutely. Gemma, thank you for the warm introduction, and I just feel incredibly grateful to be able to be in this conversation. Already listening to the Minister and to Will's opening comments, I feel like I'm among friends who have shared interest, which is a really wonderful feeling. So I do have a few slides. I was saying to some folks earlier, I have fallen into the classic trap of having too much to say, so I will compensate by trying to speak incredibly quickly, and if that fails, I'll just skip every 3rd or 4th word, and that'll get us there. So very quickly, let's go on to the next couple slides here. I think that Gemma has already nicely introduced my organization. I have the privilege of leading a group of folks who care very deeply about financial security and opportunity. We do that work through innovation and partnerships. Why don't we go on to the next slide? I think that you've already, I thought it might be of some help to be able to tell you what this landscape of financial security and insecurity looks like in the United States. We're lucky that our Federal Reserve for many years has gone out every year and done national survey work, and they include a question that is essentially, how would you handle a $400 emergency? And as you can read, 36% of respondents say they would not draw on savings to handle a $400 emergency. And that is, we think, not a good thing. It's a pretty sobering statistic. My team and colleagues were able to take that same data set and disaggregate it by income and gender and race, and you all can read the results. Perhaps unsurprisingly, but still startlingly, when we stack these additional criteria on top of one another, you can see that almost 3/4 of Black American households with incomes under $60,000, which is only slightly below our median, respond in this way that suggests they don't have $400 in savings. And if we back up a little bit from the savings picture, there's a regular series of survey work in the US that asks the question, do you live paycheck to paycheck? And the one that I was able to find that's most recent says 64% of respondents respond that they do. And I worry that language sort of loses meaning, but to me what it means is that these are people who are absolutely living in the financial present. And whatever else we might talk about, long-term retirement schemes and the like, the stuff that keeps them up at night, right? The stuff that makes the difference in how they show up in the workplace, what kind of parents they are, what kind of community members and citizens they are, It's that question of what happens tomorrow, what happens next week, maybe what happens next month. And I see the work that we're doing as directly relevant to that. So let's go on to the next slide. I think the next one is partnerships are so central to this work. We're trying to do something really big. This is a sampling of the kinds of institutions that have joined on to the BlackRock Emergency Savings Initiative in the US. It's a wide range from large banks to large employers to large benefit providers to fintechs and others. Let's go on to the next slide. So I wanted to spend a minute and give you a little bit of a deeper dive on some work we've been able to do over the last several years with United Parcel Service and their retirement vendor, Voya. And very quickly, when we met UPS several years ago, they had already realized that this question of financial security for their workforce was something they really needed to pay attention to. And in particular, they were looking for a solution for their nearly 100,000 employees who are not unionized. They had done some work. We were able to sit with them, look at their data. We did a landscape analysis. Let's go on to the next slide. And what we realized is that inside their existing pension scheme, they had something called an after-tax option. It simply means that people could contribute to their retirement savings on a post-tax basis, and they already had the ability to then draw on those funds for short-term needs. So we took that feature and helped them turn it into a dedicated, focused emergency savings feature. With due respect to the word emergency, that's the language we default to. And then to promote it. Let's go on to the next slide. Crucially, what that allowed was a connection to the pay moment, right? Automatic deduction from pay, and access. If it's going to function as rainy day savings, or I think of sometimes as a financial shock absorber, you got to be able to get to it. What the campaign we came up with involved, you can see on the screen, it was about a new landing page on their website so that when we could direct folks to this opportunity, they would see very clearly we understood that tomorrow mindset, that short-term pain, and this was a choice that they could make, an opportunity to try and be ready for those short-term shocks. There were multiple email campaigns. There was new content developed specifically for that web page using behavioral insights. There was direct mail, and we committed from the outset, obviously, to evaluate it and understand what impact we had. Let's go on to the next slide. So after a year, this is some of what we found. 23,000 people visited that landing page, so roughly a quarter of the target population. Open rates of these emails at 40%, which is extraordinarily high, right? Think of how often you open an email when it's a solicitation of some kind. It resulted in nearly 40% increase in the use of this after-tax, post-tax feature that was already present but really underutilized in their pension scheme. $10 million in increased after-tax, potentially rainy day savings. And we found through survey work afterwards that 40% of the population said, I now know about this and I understand I can use it for emergencies. I will say, you can see the number, it's still 4,155 actual workers. So we're talking somewhere in the 4 to 5% take-up rate, which I will say is consistent with what we've seen in other savings work over 2 decades. Let's go on to the next slide. Our mission is really about low and moderate income, people living on low and moderate income workers. So we looked especially at that. And I'm pleased to say, while the campaign started with higher participation rates from the general population, by about a year in, we actually saw higher participation rates from low and moderate income workers. So we think this is reaching the people who need it. As you can see, those who did not have any emergency savings were more likely to participate. So we're very pleased that this seems to be going to the people who need it. Let's go on to the next slide. So some of the key findings here, the first one we'll talk more about in a moment. From what we've been able to observe, participation in this short-term after-tax feature seemed, if anything, to correlate with greater participation in the long term. And that's really important. Certainly more work is needed on this, but I think this is one of the things we come up with, all of us, in these conversations. Is it sort of a zero-sum game? Are we going to lose out on long-term financial security by focusing on short-term? Design matters. It's important to be thoughtful about how you communicate. If it's a voluntary action, you need to make sure people are aware that they actually choose to participate and then that they build participation over time. Let's go on to the next slide. So just a little bit more on this long-term, short-term. We've also been able to partner with an industry group, a retirement industry group in the US called the Defined Contribution Investment Industry Association, and done national survey work specifically with low and moderate income workers. And what we found through the pandemic was that the presence of $2,000 in emergency savings meant that respondents, low moderate income respondents, were half as likely to have tapped into their retirement savings, which is an option in the US. And the inverse is true as well. Those who had no or very little savings told us that they were either planning to or had already exercised those options that they have to dip into their long-term savings. And unsurprisingly, people who had a dedicated emergency savings account were more likely to have emergency savings. Let's go on to the next slide. So, the question arises, if we're looking at 4 or 5% take-up rates when we do a really robust effort, what else might we consider? And that has led us, as it has led others, to consider automatic enrollment. And a key question is, well, is that something you're going to push down people's throats? And so I'm pleased to say that a number of organizations in the US banded together and went out and talked to workers. And what they found, as you can read, is 42% said, actually, that sounds pretty good to me. I would like to be automatically enrolled into a short-term savings program in my workplace. And another 14% said, maybe. From where I sit, this is extraordinarily high. If someone approached me on the street and said, I've got a great idea for you, Will, I'm going to voluntarily, take some of your pay and put it somewhere else and you can have it back if you ask for it, I'm not sure I would say yes to that. In the US at least, and perhaps in the UK as well, automatic enrollment into long-term savings has been a revolution. I wish I had this same slide for 15 years ago for retirement savings because I don't think it would have looked this strong. Let's go on to the next slide. So in our work, this has led us, there are legal and regulatory uncertainties about whether it is permissible to automatically enroll workers into automatic savings. What I'm delighted to be able to share is that one of our key regulators in the US, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has already taken action to try and provide some clarity. Our organization, applied to a program they have that seeks essentially guidance around an ambiguous area, and we have received that guidance now, which is public record, so that employers and benefits providers who would like to try this can sort of read the roadmap of what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau believes makes it permissible. So we think that's enormously important. Let's go on to the next slide. I also want to just mention that we are in a round, yet again in the US, of considering legislation for our retirement system. And one thing that we're delighted to see is that while it's not present in every conversation, the question of how emergency savings fits into retirement savings policy is a live part of that conversation. We don't expect it to reach any conclusions until after our election in the fall, but I thought that was something that might be of interest here. Let's go on to the next slide. I want to close with just some of what we've learned over 3 years doing this emergency savings work in the US. And knowing that we're a little bit at time, I won't read every word, but I think the most important meta takeaway is that by proceeding thoughtfully on multiple strategies with lots of different partners, trying a lot of different approaches, and we were just chatting about this earlier, we have really seen a tipping point in the US in the conversation and in the number of workers who have access to a quality, short-term, rainy day emergency savings. And that is really, really important and gives us cause for optimism. There's absolutely more work to do. It appears that it's not coming at the expense of long-term savings. We need to keep focused on what does behavioral science, what can it offer us for those who are still going to need to decide to choose to enroll. And it's our view that to get to the outcome we want, which is really universal liquid savings, where everybody has that shock absorber, we are probably going to have policy as part of the solution. So thanks for the chance to kind of give you a quick rundown on that. Yeah.
And thank you, Tim. Absolutely fascinating and incredible work so far. And the learnings, we can draw so many parallels, I think, across to the UK, which is why we wanted you to speak today. It's absolutely fantastic. So let's think about the UK and the UK context. I'm afraid I have to grab the mic. Brilliant. Thank you. Technology is, that's great. It's working. Roxana, so I'd love to come to you and to have your perspective from sitting with the Money and Pensions Service on actually the nation of savers goals and how this aligns with those goals and the government's goals, but also, again, what you're trialling and what you're seeing.
Sure. Thank you, Gemma. Hi, everyone. So my name is Roxana, and I work in the Insight and Evaluation team at Money and Pension Service. And for the last 3 years and a bit, I've been in charge of overseeing the payroll savings program at work at MOPS. And I'm really keen to share some of the key insights with you today. And first slide, please. I thought I'd try, to give you like a very quick overview of the payroll savings schemes in the UK. And again, just like Tim, I won't read everything on the slide. I'll just, pinpoint the key points. So payroll saving is actually one of the key recommendations for our Nation of Savers a strategic pillar, which seeks to encourage 2 million working people within the struggling and squeezed segments to start saving regularly. We know that there's quite a bit of appetite for payroll savings. Recent research shows that 72% of employees want access to workplace savings schemes, and also the employers are also quite supportive of such schemes. And this is just one of the research that was done recently by Cushon in 2020. However, despite the appetite for such schemes, the data on take-up, both among employers and employees, is quite patchy. Estimates are that about 3% of employers offer payroll saving schemes across the UK, and also the take-up rate is somewhere around 5%, even lower. So that's what we know. Next slide, please. To kind of address these gaps in knowledge, we started building up a program of evidence at MOPS on payroll savings. So on the slide, you see the 4 projects that we have on payroll savings, and I'm going to try to provide some detail on 3 of them today. And Joe will cover the sidecar trial and also the spin-off into the AutoSave initiative. So next slide, please. The first trial, the first project I'm going to talk about is what we call the Leeds Credit Union project. Here we partnered with Leeds City Council and also the NHS York. And we had the Leeds Credit Union as a payroll savings provider, and our research partner was a financial inclusion centre. The project was launched in 2019, lasted for 2 years, and in the main we tested 4 engagement initiatives. That was sign-up prize drawing incentive, face-to-face promotion, using payroll savers as champions, and also using campaigns that promote borrowing, also with the requirement to save. Next slide, please. What are some of the results? Probably unsurprisingly, the sign-up prize drawing incentive turned out to be the most effective of attracting new users, but also provided the most value for money. At the opposite side of the spectrum, we had face-to-face promotion, which was least effective, but also was the most expensive. The other 2 approaches that we trialed were moderately effective. In terms of the impact of payroll savings on users, we found that most payroll savings users reported increased financial confidence, lower anxiety, but also decreased financial vulnerability when compared to non-users. And there's usually like about a 10 to 15% difference between users and non-users here. Next slide, please. Right. The second project that we've launched in the Money and Pension Service, was launched a couple of years ago. I can name the employers here and our payroll savings provider, but I'm just going to refer to them as employer A and the fintech payroll savings provider. So here what we did, we partnered with a large professional services employer and a fintech to launch a new payroll savings product. And together with the employer, we actually designed and sent 2 types of emails to over 35,000 employees at product launch. And these emails were centered around 2 behavioral insights principles. The first behavioral insight principle was around gain frame, which basically reframes savings from a cost to something that buys you peace of mind. The second email that we sent was what we call the soft default, where we basically said, we set up an account for you, all you need to do is activate it. And then the employer, to boost up take-up rates, they also decided to offer a £5 sign-up bonus and also enter all users into a £1,000 prize draw. Next slide, please. The results were quite impressive, if I may say so. 4 times more people signed up to payroll savings when they received the soft default email, which basically told them that we had the account open for them. Employees also tended to like the second email that we sent around the peace of mind, but the results were not as good, obviously, as the soft default one. The incentives are also quite effective. So within the first 2 weeks of launching the emails around incentives, the number of users tripled. However, the incentive continued for another month, and we saw in the second month that the number of users was much lower, of new users, which also suggests that the impact of the incentives wears off after a certain amount of time. Next slide, please. Okay, who's using the product? We noticed that the product was most attractive to people who earn under 25K a year, have little or no savings, and find it difficult to save consistently. Saving levels vary significantly. We had anything from £1 a month to about £5,000 a month. But most users went with the default that was suggested in the savings app, which was £50 a month. And there was very little variation, very little changes in the amount that over the subsequent months with regard to the amount that they chose to save. Next slide, please. In terms of the impact on users, we saw that payroll savings increased the confidence in managing money, helped to build a regular savings habit, and also helped to build a small saving buffer. The payroll savings product tended to have a larger positive effect on people people with lower incomes, and some people even refer to the product as being transformative. That being said, we had quite good take-up rates. However, the take-up rates still were in the single digits at the end of the project. So despite the good results that we got with the soft default, we're still under 5%. Next slide, please. The third project I'm going to talk about today is what they call the Northern Ireland Payroll Savings Project. Here we work with 2 employers, small employers this time, just over 100 employees each. Both employers offered employees the opportunity to set up a payroll savings account with a credit union. We worked with 2 credit unions as well. And the sign-up process, was pretty relatively easy. It was either via an app or face-to-face. As opposed to the other projects, MAPS didn't have much involvement here on the design of the project and its implementation, so we only just looked at understanding, how the product was rolled and what were some of the learnings there. Next slide, please. So what we've learned. After about a month of launching the product, about 10 to 15% of the workforce at each employer signed up to payroll savings, so quite good rates. We found out that high levels of employment trust and the word of mouth were key factors in encouraging take-up. People tend to like particularly the automated nature of payroll savings, but also the flexibility to withdraw and change their savings amounts from whenever they choose to. We found that credit unions were particularly good partners in Northern Ireland, given the level of trust that people place in credit unions here. The majority of non-users were positive about joining payroll savings, and so there is a hope there that the take-up rates may increase over time. The biggest barrier to signing up was actually that people were already saving via another savings product. And both users and non-users told us that if the employer chose to offer an incentive, a sign-up incentive, then they really thought that the take-up rates would increase. Next slide, please. And you'll be delighted to hear that. That's my last slide. So some final reflections, just kind of looking across all our projects in MAPS. We found that payroll savings can be particularly effective at helping non-savers become savers. That's particularly relevant for low-income earners, so those under 25K a year, but also younger people. Users seem to be particularly attracted to automation and also the ease of setup. The application was there. All you needed to do is just sign up over a few minutes. We found that default saving levels are crucial when designing payroll saving schemes. So most people went with the default that was presented in the application. The monthly saving target, the monthly saving amount was £50. So most people decided to go with it. And we found that there was very little movement over the months ahead, in the amount that they chose to save. So there was no change there mostly. We've also found that behavioral insights can boost engagement with payroll savings. The combination of telling people that we've opened an account for them, combined with price drop, can really help boost engagement. For small employers, trust and word of mouth are important facilitators. However, as I said, despite the very good results that we think we got across the projects, only a minority of employees are actually using the product, across all our partners. There's a variety of barriers, and probably the biggest one was that people are already saving via other means. Inertia is another powerful barrier that we came across. Concerns around data security, particularly when there's joint accounts, but also providing enough product information to put people's worries at ease, but also not overwhelm them with the information. So in the Northern Ireland project, for instance, we found that people were concerned that if they joined the payroll savings product, they would, their mortgage application would be declined, even though in speaking with the mortgage provider, actually that was not going to be the case, but just providing enough information to put their worries at ease we found to be quite important. And so that's a really quick snapshot of what we found out. And I'm going to pass over to Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. And I mean, it's fascinating to hear the number of different trials that are also in scope. A lot of themes consistently coming out, even between Tim and Roxana. So, Joe, with that, I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about the work that you've been doing next.
Thank you, Gemma. It is a tough act to follow Tim and Roxana, so I am going to try and share where our learnings have reinforced things that have been found in other pieces of research, and also dig a bit more into that question of the why behind the low take-up rate system and what we think we might be able to do about it. So our way into thinking about shorter-term financial security and the role of the workplace in supporting people to have accessible savings in place began from our focus on longer-term financial security and retirement savings. And as many of you know, we came into this through exploring the sidecar savings model, which is designed to work with savers' mental accounting by linking an accessible savings account with a retirement savings account that is illiquid, and to see what impact that had on both shorter and longer-term financial well-being. So since 2019, we've been conducting a real-world research trial of a sidecar savings tool called JARS, which is provided by Salary Finance and which is currently offered as a workplace benefit to employees in 5 UK organisations: BT, ITV, StepChange, Timpson and the University of Glasgow. So the way it works is employees sign up to save via payroll. They set an amount to save each time they're paid and a savings target. Each payday, their money goes first into an instant access Yorkshire Building Society savings account, and then if they reach their savings targets, their payroll savings start flowing into their workplace pension on top of their existing pension contributions that they're making regularly. We are partway through what is a multi-year evaluation, and we're looking forward to sharing the final results next year, but we've been sharing our learnings as much as possible along the way, and we published another paper this morning around the saver behaviours that we're seeing. And from this starting point, looking at payroll savings, we've since expanded our work programme looking at other aspects of workplace emergency saving, with a growing focus on this question of how the different parts of people's financial lives interact and how we can support that as a holistic picture. So I'm first going to talk through a few learnings from the sidecar trial, and then I'm going to talk about how we built from that learning and those insights to develop and explore an auto-save approach. So first of all, how does that theory translate into practice, that model that we were interested in? How are people using that JARS payroll savings tool in real life? So our oldest JARS users have now been saving for 2 or more years, whilst we've still got the sort of youngest who have only recently signed up, just starting their payroll saving journey. And we can see that users are commonly saving £50 to £100 a month, and they're setting savings targets of a couple of £1,000s. So on that basis, with some basic maths, we can work out that it's going to take most users at least 2 to 3 years to get to their savings target, even if they make no withdrawals. So we will be able to look at what we see in terms of what happens when people get close to and hit that savings target, but we're not quite there yet. However, we can look at how people are saving and using those accessible savings. And we're really encouraged by signs that users are quite engaged and active. You know, the savings happens automatically in the background, but they are quite actively engaging with their accounts. So we see that about a quarter of JARS users have made a change to their savings amount, with more people putting it up than putting it down. And we do see this sort of pattern of growing confidence with people saving a bit, finding that manageable and putting it up. We also see that just over 1 in 5 users have put extra money into their savings account outside of payroll. So the payroll saving thing got them a savings account, but they're using it in other ways and saving in it in other ways. And about 2/3 of users have made a withdrawal, and I'll talk a bit more about the patterns we see there in a minute. We're also seeing that once people start saving through payroll, they save persistently. So very few accounts have been closed, and 93% of JARS users are saving every month since they signed up. As we get further into the data analysis, we're starting to be able to see different savings behaviours. So we can see that the average savings balance after 1 year is just over £700, but the balance profile varies quite a lot under the surface of that average. So this chart shows the distribution of how JARS users' balances are changing over time. And you can see that whilst the top portion of balances are growing, the balances at the bottom quartile stay relatively flat over time. They're sort of going up and down, but in a relatively flat line on the bottom. We've explored this further, and we've identified through talking to savers and trying to understand these patterns 3 different ways of behaving with payroll saving that I'm just going to quickly talk through now. So the first is the use case that many of us had in mind, where payroll saving is used to build a safety net. So this is often called emergency savings, rainy day savings. It's the thing that a lot of us had in mind walking into the room today. And you know, although we refer to it that way, that's perhaps not the most motivating way to talk about this with savers, and we need to kind of think carefully about the language we use. But here we see people are establishing a financial buffer to protect against unexpected expenses or income shocks. And we've had lots of examples already today: the car or appliance repair, the vet bill, the school uniforms, working fewer hours, having less overtime than expected. And the pattern we see here is a balance that builds over time, but with part or all of that balance withdrawn periodically, perhaps once or twice a year when it's needed to deal with those financial shocks. The next pattern we see is working towards future goals, which is sort of perhaps the kind of comfort zone of the savings industry, where people are building a fund towards known events. It's really important that they could be shorter or longer term, so it could be Christmas this year, or it could be trying to save enough for a deposit on a home or for a wedding, or for something longer term. And here the pattern we see is kind of the money builds steadily over time and until that goal is met, and then there is one big withdrawal, possibly to zero, but the benefit of the payroll saving mechanism is that then the savings will start to build again. The third use case is where JARS is used for budgeting and cash flow management, to keep some money set aside from day-to-day spending for ongoing and ad hoc essential expenses like bills, fuel, topping up the meter, shopping, and social participation. And here we see frequent withdrawals of smaller amounts, mostly under £100, and the balance cycles up and down, but overall stays quite flat over time. This non-cumulative saving is perhaps the least acknowledged and the least understood need, but the people who describe using payroll savings in this way talk just as emphatically about the positive impact on their financial well-being of having access to payroll saving as those who are steadily building a balance. So why does this matter? Why do these different patterns matter? Well, first of all, we can see that people move between the behaviours, and there's potential to support them on that journey towards greater financial security. So once people get to a position where they're able to manage their kind of budgeting and cash flow, if their situation improves, and they've been doing that through payroll saving, they already have the plumbing in place to start building a savings net. They already have the payroll mechanism and the savings account there. And with that safety net in place, people are more able to work towards their future goals for themselves, for their households, for their family. And by seeing this diversity in savings behaviours, we can also start to think about how to reflect them and support those needs in product design and communications. So, for example, we can think about rewarding the savings habits rather than the balance, but rewarding people saving persistently, consistently over months instead of the amount that they have in the account. We can also start to think about facilitating withdrawals rather than disincentivising them or penalising them. We can think about perhaps not being too prescriptive about talking about what the savings are for, but focusing on the emotional benefits like peace of mind and control. We could perhaps allow people to earmark money saved in their own way. So, there are examples of being able to label pots in different ways or kind of put pictures on them or kind of say what they're for, which we know can be really motivating. We should really think about building saver confidence along that journey by recognising and celebrating personalised milestones. Well done, you've been saving for 3 months now, you've been saving for 6 months now. And also the opportunity that payroll saving provides to connect savers to support and guidance around other aspects of financial health and other sources of support and advice. So I'm going to ask a really basic question now, which is what's so great about payroll saving? And I do this because I'm sort of reasonably frequently asked, why is payroll saving any different to setting up a direct debit into a savings account or joining a savings club? And I think we've heard sort of pockets of this, but I just want to be really clear that there are 3 main advantages that come through consistently in the research that's been shared already today and in our research. The first is ease and simplicity. So it can be quite complex to choose a product and a provider, particularly if you are not confident and not used to doing that. The choice can be really overwhelming. How do you weigh up those different benefits and features? Do you need to think about interest rates, those percentage points, and it all gets quite complicated. And we know also there are high levels of mistrust and scepticism about financial services, particularly amongst those who aren't already saving. Those barriers are all reduced if there is a good savings solution put in place in my workplace by my employer. The second huge advantage is payroll deduction. People want to save, but it can be hard to do so consistently. Without that regular mechanism, it's hard to remember to move the money. It takes time, energy, and knowledge to set up that mechanism. And we know that we feel losses deeply as human beings. So once we have the money, it's hard to put it to one side. Consistently, people, including those we heard in the film earlier, talk passionately about the power of savings being made automatically every payday before the money hits their pocket. And we should not take for granted how effective that mechanism is at overcoming barriers to saving. The third advantage is partitioning. So the fact that the savings account is easily accessible but separate from day-to-day finances acts as a really effective self-control mechanism. It protects those savings from spending temptation and all the other calls that there are on money day to day. People talk about it being invisible and at the same time comforting. It's just a little bit set aside. And it's that peace of mind that payroll savings users talk about time and again when they talk about why they like it. So what's the target audience for payroll saving? And importantly, is JARS reaching them? So obviously, not everyone needs payroll saving. And if we flip some of the kind of data points that Tim shared on their heads, we know that most employees are already saving in other ways. The latest Wealth and Assets Survey data shows that 6 in 10 households already have an accessible savings account. When we asked employees about saving mid-pandemic, 50% said they had an account in place. Another measure we often look at is the sort of UK version of Tim's dollar bill, which is how able people would be to pay a £300 bill within a week from their own cash. And 7 out of 10 employees eligible for JARS would be able to do that. We also know that some people can't save right now. People need enough income to have routinely positive cash flow before they can put money to one side. And people should probably think about clearing problem debt first. And you know, there are some good models for saving alongside responsible borrowing, but you know, there might be some things that people need to do before saving. But as the budgeting and cash flow management use case shows, we should be careful about making assumptions about whether saving is affordable or not for people, because you know, it may be being used day to day. Actually, that's a helpful support for people who we might think saving is not affordable for. So to be clear, we're really not aiming for 100% participation in payroll savings. When we hear those take-up figures, I think it's really important to remember that it will vary in different employer contexts, but I think the target audience for payroll saving is probably somewhere between 20 and 50% of employees varying in different workplaces. So do we see that reflected in the participation that we're getting? The short answer is no. Participation is not reflecting that appetite or that need. JAR's participation is currently around 1% of employees around the trial population. It's early days, we've had the pandemic, there's been lots of challenges, but as we've heard, that's not unusual. And we know that this isn't because people don't see the need. Almost all employees say having emergency savings is important to them, 9 out of 10 do. And it's not because payroll saving isn't relevant. So we've seen about half of eligible employees say they think JARS would help them, which makes sense when we think about the proportion of people who are already saving. So if people want and need to save, and payroll saving overcomes many of the barriers to people saving, and it helps people at different stages of that financial security journey build confidence, build financial well-being, how can we get people started? If even the best designed interventions where we can say 2 times more, 5 times more, 10 times more people still don't shift the dial from 1, 2, 3, 4% participation. We've asked employees and we've looked in depth at the data we've got to get to the bottom of what's stopping people signing up to save through payroll. And we think there are 4 main barriers left to overcome. Firstly, awareness. Even with investment in communications programs, employees are often unaware that there's a payroll scheme that they could use. Secondly, inertia. People mean to sign up to save, they just don't get around to it. Thirdly, and really importantly, self-confidence. People who have not saved before or who have struggled to save in the past may doubt whether they can do it and lack the confidence to sign up and give it a try. And lastly, friction. There is drop-up at every stage of the sign-up journey. Even in the best designed, smoothest sign-up journey, people will deliberate over how much should I save each pay period. They might have to provide some information. We know we lose them along the way. So how can we support employees to overcome these remaining barriers? Well, what if it was easier to start saving than not to save? What if we switch the default so that those who want to save do nothing, and those who don't want or need to save are the ones who have to take action, the people who are likely to be more confident to do that and take that action? We know that auto-enrolment made a huge difference in pension saving. We think we could use that same mechanism to increase participation who want to save for the shorter term. And in a context where the risk profile for doing that is very different, because unlike with pensions, the money saved would be instantly accessible from day one. To be really clear, we're not saying we think all employers should have to do this, as with pensions regulation, but what if they wanted to? Could they? How would it work? We've been exploring this question. We've explored the regulatory considerations, how you would communicate it, how you would design it. And we're currently 6 months into a trial of an opt-out payroll savings or auto-save approach working with Suez Waste and Recycling. And I'm really excited that Michelle is here to talk about how they've put this in place with their credit union, Transave UK. And we'll give you a perspective on what it means from an employer point of view. But just before handing over to her, I want to give a sense of the difference that approach could make. We'll be sharing full results later this year, but at the early stage, the picture is really promising. So in the previous opt-in joining model at Suez, we understand that payroll savings participation was around 4 to 6%, in line with everything we've heard today. For the cohort of employees who experienced auto-save, where they began to save if they didn't actively opt out, it looks like participation is over 40%. And importantly, we've seen no increase in pension opt-out amongst that group of employees who experienced auto-save. We've started profiling those 2 groups. So far, they look really similar in terms of their savings behaviours and their financial well-being. So we think this difference in savings participation is likely to be down to that behavioural support for saving and not to any kind of differences in characteristics between the groups. It's just the first look. We'll be analysing the trial data in lots more detail so that we can give a kind of really accurate view, but we really wanted to share that today, and we can see that the difference is substantial. But perhaps the most exciting thing that we see coming through is how quickly this has made a difference to Suez employees' financial well-being. And I just really want to point to these 2 quotations from Suez employees on the slide here, talking about this being empowering. Now I've got savings. I've never had savings before. My financial situation is improving. I'd never have done it myself. I didn't have to do anything. It was all done for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. And, the quantitative results, even though they're early, are impressive. But the qualitative results are also really inspiring. And Michelle, with that, I'd love to hear from you around actually as the employer, as Suez, why did you actually sign up to the AutoSave trial, and what barriers did you overcome along the way?
Okay, so we signed up because we actually were one of those lucky employers to have the letter from the Pensions Minister. And we already had a working relationship with Transave UK. We'd implemented the savings scheme in October 2019, so we were already partway through there. We'd also had implemented a salary drawdown, so you can draw down partial savings up to 30%, partial earnings, earned in real time early to avoid the payday loans, the emergency loans that you really don't want people to go to. Thank God Wonga is no longer. So we were part way there with our relationships. So I got the letter and I contacted Joe and Emma and said that I'd be interested in working with them and seeing if we could take this trial further. I had read the Financial Times document where they talked about the savings sidecar, and this felt a bit similar, but people can access it in real time. My main barrier, I'd say, was wondering, legislation and regulatory, will this be seen as an unlawful deduction from pay? Because that's what all employers tend to worry about. So, and there's no policy telling us either way. So I sought legal advice, and actually, we took the view that no, because we're just siphoning off a portion and it's easily accessible. We used our data from our early drawdown on salary earned in real time to look at what the average drawdown is and use that as our default savings amount, which Roxana said, £50, we use 40, using the data we had at our fingertips. So, it was more about how are we going to do this, how onerous is it going to be on us, they're the barriers, going through all the legal work, the due diligence internally, externally as well. And, looking what systems we had in place to make this work as smoothly as possible. So understanding the consents, we can't just there's nothing telling us we can auto-enroll people into a savings scheme. So we worked really well with Joe and Emma to put consents in place in the onboarding tool itself and work on the communication and pitch it at the right level to our employee workforce and, our culture. So
what have you heard coming back from your employees since the trial's been put in place?
It's been massively positive. Even employees who have opted out have contacted me and said, I'm not ready yet, but I'd like to, sign up at some point. And I've been asked, can't we just auto-enroll the whole workforce? Because those who aren't already saving have to go and opt in. And exactly the problem that I've heard today, it's the inertia, there's always a stopping point. So they want us to enrol them. So wouldn't that be amazing if we just decided to enrol the whole workforce who wasn't already saving? It's an interesting one. Shall we take that one forward?
Thanks, Michelle. So, Ian, I feel like we've spent a lot of time talking, and I feel that you
So you want me to talk some more? Is that what you're telling me, Gemma?
You need to contribute your perspective from the University of Lincoln.
Thank you. So, and thank you for the invite down. And it's apt that we're using the word insight a lot, because I think our case study maybe is an insight, and it's probably about what universities do, which is a culture of experimentation. So let me just give you a quick run through our case study and bring to life Campus Jobs. So Campus Jobs is our function that we have that employs students on our campus. We have about 1,500 students who we engage there alongside their studies. So typically 18 to 21-year-olds in about 80 different roles that they deliver on campus. They are there primarily as a student, but secondary, we like to give them the opportunity to earn a little bit of money. But more importantly, those roles are really part of their education. It's about, with each role, identifying the skills that they are going to achieve with that role to make sure that they get it on their CV to make them employable. So Campus Jobs typically will have some students who work every week, in roles such as ICT help desks. They are much better than our regular staff can be at solving the tech problems. They help on open days for us as ambassadors, and we have them working on projects that need assistance across the university. So we have some who earn very regularly, some who earn very irregularly. So the challenge that we had is that under the auto-enrolment rules, we had very few who actually hit the auto-enrolment target. In fact, out of just over 1,200 individuals, noting quite a rapid turnover of students, we had about 10 of them who actually had either hit auto-enrolment and stopped in the pension scheme, or 10 of them who had voluntarily come to us saying, somebody's had a word with me, I'm told that I need to go into the pension scheme, normally parental influence. Now, that's not that they work for campus jobs with a lack of education. As you'd expect for a university, where that's our core business, we have an award-winning financial fairy tales education programme that we sit alongside their employment, which talks to them about understanding tax, understanding multi-employments that many of them will have across the city, understanding the importance of savings. So any decisions that they're making, they're not done with naivety. You know, we'd like to think our purpose of financial education is to make sure that they're making informed decisions. So I believe genuinely that any decisions around joining the pension scheme or not is done in an educated and informed way. Now, as you can imagine, that low take of a pension is actually quite sad as an employer. We have a scheme that double matches any contributions that they put in. And for me, as part of their employment, that money is sat there as part of their employment package. So the fact that it's not being utilised is actually quite sad because it is ring-fenced for that purpose. So what solution did we come up with? So we've actually worked with our partner, who we worked with anyway, who are Cushon, who have been mentioned earlier. And what we've done instead is we've brought in a contractually enrolled workplace ISA scheme for our students. So all of our new students are contractually enrolled within the workplace ISA scheme. So we are seeing some quite astounding results from that. That what we are finding is that individuals aren't opting out of the workplace ISA. What we are finding is that actually parents are topping up workplace ISA accounts for them. What we are finding is that students are making decisions through using the app on their phone to look at the money going in directly from their pay, to seeing it hit their app, and understanding the information that's coming back to them. What we're also seeing with our 18 to 21-year-olds is that they are making ethical investments. And actually, they are choosing to invest in ethical funds ahead of higher risk, higher return funds, which I think says a lot about the future. So for us, the workplace ISA scheme, I think perhaps gives a real insight in the fact that, you know, students will stop in a workplace ISA scheme. They understand the importance of it. They will take ownership and manage their own funds. They will then access the government top-up of things like the lifetime ISA, which we've heard mentioned. It is maybe part of that baton passing of savings that we see ourselves doing with education, that as people come through secondary school where financial education sits on the curriculum, that's part of what we need to do as a university. But we're also introducing them to workplace ISAs, which I would expect them to then seek from employers when they continue on their journeys into the workplace. And we like to use the concept of layering up our education. And I think, you know, the insight here is that there could be a generation coming to you as employers who will be looking for these sort of savings vehicles because that's what they've been told about in a university, that's what they're used to accessing. And I think that aspect of ethical investments, we've spoken a lot about communication and engagement, but there is certainly a trigger about a generation, which we're very lucky here to have a select experiment almost of the younger generation, but ethical investment is very key to them, and the way to get them to engage isn't always so much about talking about them for personal gain individually, but it's talking about how their funds are being invested instead. So, you know, I think our scheme that we've got running, which is running very successfully, we'll have a big intake of new students coming in September who will sign up and be contractually involved into it. I think it demonstrates that with education, And with the right savings vehicles and the right processes, you can get individuals to partake in workplace savings. So I know that we're quite tight on time, so I will stop there and leave it for any questions thereafter.
Thank you, Ian. No doubt there will be lots of questions for you both, because I know we have lots of employers in the audience. I'm going to pose one question, but I'm really keen to hear from you all in the room and also those who are listening online. If we go back to pension saving and the interrelationship between short-term savings and pension saving, Tim, I'm coming back to you because I know in the US context there's been some concern that this might cannibalise long-term pension saving. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah, and maybe at the risk of repeating a little bit, I think we now have some early evidence that it's not the case, or has not been the case. But yeah, just to repeat it, I think the intuition is pretty simple. People are under a lot of financial stress. We've all said that today. And in some sense, we may assume they're fixed, their pie available for savings is fixed, and so. But what I hear from the panel that I think might help us imagine a different way of thinking about it is that it really resonates, this idea that people who have never been able to save suddenly find themselves in this new land, an identity that they had never possessed. That's just something that other people do, people who have more money or people who have more savvy or people who came up in a certain background. And when we're able to help people inhabit this new land, they still live in a world of constraints. But now it's possible, and it may be, and I will own that this is an intuition of my own, not evidence-based at this point, but there may be something about being in that new place and inhabiting that new identity that makes you open to other kinds of saving as well. Or another way to say that, perhaps, is one way I think about the work is, to be clear, I always want to feel that it's our job to help people get where they want to go, not to tell them where they want to go. But I really never met a person, and I'd be curious if my fellow panelists have. We've been doing this work for 20 years. I've really never met a person who says, savings, I don't really get the value of that. What's that good for? Like, that's just not a conversation that you have, right? It's always an aspiration on some level. And so if we can help people to realize that aspiration, that's part of our work. It's not just the technical solutions. It's also the sort of transformational side of inviting people into a space they haven't inhabited. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think the early evidence is it's not a fixed pie, and that people are open to both kinds of savings.
It does. And I think just lastly, I guess that same question to you, Joe, with the UK hat on with the research, and if it's telling you anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to share some early data that Michelle has shared with us, that we are not seeing any difference in pension opt-out rates amongst the group of Suez employees who have been through the autosave experience. That was clearly a question that lots of us in this room had going into that. Okay, so if we make this thing better, are we going to make something else worse? And we haven't seen that. We've seen that there's been no impact so far. We'll keep looking at that, but we haven't. And I think I agree with Tim. I think there is, by joining these things up, by offering people both options at the same time, perhaps we don't make it more difficult to do both. Perhaps actually we make it easier to do both, because I can kind of think about all of those things in one go.
Okay, so we'll see if there are any questions from the floor. Please do feel free to put up your hand. Michelle has a mic here. There's one over here.
Hi, Andrew Gall from the Building Societies Association. I just wanted to ask about, people mentioned a lot of incentives at the start and at the launch of these schemes. Was there anything that's been looked at and defined in terms of ongoing incentives for employee engagement and kind of employee champions, or around key points in time like pay rises and that kind of thing?
So I think incentives, I know, Ian, I think perhaps you can answer that question, because I know obviously you've offered incentive, and then Roxana, perhaps you can add to that too.
Yeah, and I think incentives in two ways. So one is obviously as part of the ISA scheme, as an employer, we put in employee contributions into the ISA scheme to incentivise a saving. But I think there's the psychological incentivising as well. So we have ambassadors, student ambassadors. We know the age group we're predominantly talking about. It's peer recommendation that is going to encourage them to join schemes. So we use financial ambassadors amongst campus jobs who have a clear purpose, remit and role. We get them together regularly to talk about what do we need to be doing more of, less of, communication-wise, to have active discussion. So I guess we incentivise in two ways. One is we've got a role as an employer, but secondly, we make sure that people are fully aware and understand and the importance of, and it's their fellow peers who are talking to them about, well, why haven't you?
In our project, we've tested incentives only at the sign-up stage. We obviously have the example of the large employer that I gave earlier, where in the second month, the insane incentives actually didn't provide, too good results. So for us, it'll be really interesting to try to see, like you said, like different types of incentives, maybe to incentivize the persistent savings as opposed to, just the opening of the account. So that's definitely an area that would be interesting in doing more research.
I would say we also have health and wellbeing ambassadors, but there are incentives in being in Transave. So, they've got the help towards funeral costs. If you die, your money's protected. Be £1,250 towards funeral costs, just by being a saver. A monthly saver is amazing, but also there's the prize draw, so they can siphon off part of their savings into the Share 6 scheme. So they just ask Transave to do that, and they go in a monthly prize draw, and where you can win up to £5,000 a month. That's just by being an automatic saver. Yeah.
Thank you. So a wide degree of incentivisation that's possible, and it clearly works. Minister.
So I would be a contrarian here. So I think the combined body of evidence would seem to suggest that where you babysit employees, you will always get a very good take-up. Great. Tick that box. Imagine everybody agrees. The tricky bit is, and I obviously am delighted that my letter nudged Michelle, is that the blunt truth is very few employers are actually signing up. And the bit I don't quite get the solutions on, and where I think particularly MAPS has got to do a lot of work, Nest has got to do some work, because I pay for both of them out of the taxpayer money, but is that why is the employer not doing this? Now, I do lots of naming and shaming, but I'd love to know, because you're right, Michelle, by the way, it's not illegal to do this. It's patently clear that's not a problem. You've got some comms management, but how is it that the panel particularly feel you are going to nudge, cajole, shame, or actually sort employers to do this in the absence of government stepping in and passing lots of laws, which is really complicated, very difficult, and takes 2 to 3 years?
So, employers. How do we get more employers involved? Michelle, would you like to take a stab at that one? And I know the next session is also going to answer a lot of those questions too. But
I think, you want to be an employer who really cares. So, we're doing what we say we're doing, but a little bit more because we're in this trial. So we do talk to our employees about financial well-being, mental well-being. So we're doing as much as we possibly can now. And I think for the employer, you want to be an employer of choice. So you want your package to tick every box, So I think employers are nervous. And they don't want it to be another really onerous task like automatic enrolment, maybe, I'm just saying. And you want it to be a very slick opt-out choice. We don't want to have to point them somewhere else to opt out. So we make it as easy as possible. So the employer needs to know how you can work on it and make it something that's possible without requiring a lot of extra resource to do so.
And Ian, from your perspective, has there been a lot of inertia, particularly caused by recent years as well with the pandemic?
100%. I think the pandemic has been a real accelerator where we do have to look at employees now as people a lot more and understand a lot more about what's going on with them. And it's brought to a head how small often people's cushion is that they have to fall back on. I guess a couple of points that I would just make is I think financial well-being and financial education have previously been seen as nice to have, and some of the things we're talking about, the vehicles that then support that, have still fallen into second place behind perhaps the physical and mental well-being. I think we're just waking up to the intrinsic links now between mental health and financial health, and how the two interact with each other. The one other aspect I'd say is it's about the influence, leaders of organisations who perhaps struggle to relate to this concept of needing to have a little bit of savings are the ones who can influence decisions. So sometimes writing the letter to the person at the top of the organisation isn't always going to have the highest impact of helping them, be realistic. I would draw a nod to the profession of payroll, who are the people who can make these things happen, have the knowledge how to make them happen, and we often leave them operationally delivering activities without using them as the voice as to why things would happen. So I guess, what does change look like? I think we've got to influence far more people than just those at the top of the organisation.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
Go on then, quick one.
Go on then. We have one just behind you, Michelle. Thank you.
So I know you're going to discuss this later, but just briefly, by way of slightly answering the Minister, in case he has to go off. So at the moment, you remember we were talking about Leeds City Council and Yorkshire NHS. So where Financial Inclusion Centre then started Action for Financial Inclusion, and then we got funding from Scottish Government. So there is a halfway house between legislation and just people starting off from grassroots. And that's that we find that employers are persuaded by the support of Scottish Government. So they become intrigued by that. So what we're finding now is it's simply a matter of awareness. So, for example, it is quite tough still. We wrote to 100 companies. We got 5% coming back to us saying, might be interested. Wrote again, phone calls, etc. 15% went up. But then when we got those 15% of companies, nearly nobody turned it down. They're all interested now. So there's about 30 large employers, some up to 35,000 staff talking to us, of which a dozen or 13 have now come on board. And that's in the last 12 weeks. So that's just very, very recent, up to date. I've got no report on this yet. This is just what's happening right now. So very, very good company. Got a talk yesterday with Scottish Water. They really want to use the campaign. It's called Work and Save Scotland. They're very happy that it's now part of MAP's delivery plan for Scotland for next year. Plus, so they've got that UK sort of brand to it. Plus, it's coming directly from Shona Robinson, the Cabinet Secretary of Social Justice, Housing and Local Government. They love the idea as well that they can do something which governments might quite like. So they've got that sort of internal comms and policy comms angle to it as well, which incentivises them. But the most important thing, and this is my last sentence, is when you get in touch with them, they have a great resource, a great well of enthusiasm for it already. So you've got really happy people. So you get Scottish Enterprise, Scottish and Glasgow Airport saying, we were looking for a financial inclusion thing. This is just what we want.
Thank you very much. I think we're at time or over time, so thank you very much to our panellists. I hope today you all learned a lot. There are a lot of common themes coming out of today. It leads us really nicely on to the next session, which is, to your question, Minister, around employers and how can we how can employers now start rolling out more of this at scale. So thank you to you all. We now
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and welcome back after that break. And I'm delighted to kick off the second panel of today's event. Just a quick reminder for those joining from on the stream that, or joining for the first time, that you can put your questions to our panel using slido.com and entering the hashtag Emergency Savings Summit. And also please do join in with us on social media, again using that same hashtag. So we heard earlier on about what research has told us so far in the workplace emergency savings space, and I think that was a great panel. I certainly found it absolutely fascinating. And we focused a lot on what's been tried in relation to take-up and this whole question of the intention behaviour gap for employees. We had some great data from Joe about opt-out savings models and what we've seen so far in the work we've done with Suez, and we heard a couple of great case studies as well from Suez and the University of Lincoln about things they've tried in that space. Almost scripted, we ended on a challenge or a question from the Minister around what more can be done to drive take-up in the employer space, and that's very much the focus of this second panel. It is absolutely brilliant to see that more employers are now getting into this space and more employers are doing things, and it's increasingly possible to find great and innovative case studies to highlight at events like this. But it's also clear that although a lot of employers talk very positively about the need to support workers with financial well-being, and there is quite a lot of evidence, I would say, about demand for that support among employees, take-up among the employer community does remain fairly low. So why is that? Let's try and spend a bit of time trying to understand why that might be, and understanding what might help the adoption of these solutions at greater scale. To do that, I'm delighted to have an absolutely expert panel with me. So to welcome our panelists, we have Katie Duxbury, who is Head of Payroll Services at Bupa. Asesh Sarkar, who is Global CEO of Salary Finance. Lauren Langton, who's the Director of Business Development at Incuto, and Jake Outfield, who's a Program Manager at Fair for All Finance. So we put this panel together to bring a bit more of the employer voice, but also the savings provider voice, and with Fair for All Finance, that kind of higher level strategic view of some of the things going on in the financial wellbeing space. This is a less presentation-based panel than the last one. It's going to be mostly discursive. So what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to just spend a few minutes introducing themselves, talking about their interest and their involvement in this space. And then we'll go straight to questions. I have some, but I'm hoping that it'll become an open discussion, and perhaps we'll get some more insight into the Minister's challenge, what's stopping this, and what more could we do to drive take-up amongst employers. And so, without further ado, I think, Katie, you're going to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Will, for the invite and for making me go first as well. So I am Katie Duxbury. I look after payroll services and payroll-led benefits for Bupa UK and Global. I'm here hopefully to give a representative of the employer sector, and I am feeling the heat a little bit from the Minister with the challenge in the last session. Our purpose ultimately is to help people live longer, healthier, happier lives. That is what we're about, and health for us is most definitely a three-legged stool of physical, mental and financial health, so it wouldn't be a surprise to know that we offer that as part of our EAP to our corporate clients around financial health. I think from a HR perspective, we have been encouraging our employees to engage with their financial health for a number of years and have lots of things in that portfolio. So we obviously have our pensions and salary sacrifice that you would expect from any employer. We've also had long-standing partnerships now with Salary Finance, our neighbour as was, and credit unions, Lauren will be pleased to know. And they have had a limited take-up, so usually 2-digit take-up, not really what we wanted, despite lots of engagement and comms. The game changer for us was something that we implemented in 2019, which was a product called WageStream. This was originally designed to help our employees access their earned wages slightly before payday to insulate them from any shocks that they would have that were unexpected and would ordinarily have driven them to maybe a payday lender or high interest loan products, bank charges, violating overdraft fees and all these kind of awful situations that then obviously makes that situation worse. We launched that as a financial wellbeing app, and whilst it was meant to be a pay-on-demand product,
the actual take-up that we have is more around tracking pay. Just seeing in the corner of your eye what money you're earning as each day you turn up to a shift, and having that as a way of managing mental health around your finances. We also have a savings product, and we refer to it as a micro savings account because it isn't interest bearing, but we have 20% take-up of that product, which I think, reflecting on the earlier commentaries, is quite a robust take-up, as well as I think within 2 months of us launching that in 2019, we had 10,000 of the knowledge-based articles read. So there's definitely a hunger there for people to learn how to get in front of their finances and how to control them. So hopefully you can see I'm quite passionate about this space, and hopefully can answer some questions as we go into the Q&A.
Great, thank you very much, Katie. And I think Asesh, you're going to go next.
Sure, hi. Asesh, I guess I have two roles in the space. One is one of the founders and the group CEO of Salary Finance. We are a financial wellness provider working exclusively with employers and helping the financial wellness of their employees. I'm also the chair at MyBank, which is the UK's largest financial education charity for the young and typically vulnerable. And I guess you have a perspective to share on kind of both sides. So on the provider side, in the kind of 6 or 7 years we've been doing this, we've seen increasing adoption from employers, and so we reach 650 clients in the UK and the US. That includes 20% of the FTSE 100, 1 in 4 hospitals, 9 of the 10 biggest supermarkets, and kind of similar in the US, everyone from Tesla supporting their 30,000 employees in California through to Tesco in the UK. And so we found employers becoming incredibly supportive. Like Paul said, there's now a pretty strong evidence base. We've done 2 studies, independent studies with Harvard, one with the Kennedy School, one with the Business School, where there's actually good evidence base into why employers see benefits when they offer these types of products to employees. We also believe very much in holistic financial wellness, so we're kind of product agnostic, and so we offer salary-linked savings, 3 different types, one with Nest, one with HMRC's Help to Save, one with YBS in the UK, and one with Chime in the US. We offer salary-linked loans and wage access, 3 types of insurance and education as well. And then I think, broadly we're seeing the employer adoption increase pretty rapidly. We reach 4.5 million people now across the UK and the US. And then where we're trying to get more standardization is in the employee take-up. And so we have a cohort of employers which have incredibly high take-up, very thoughtful, very impactful. But there's also a kind of a tail where employers would like to offer the product, but actually the take-up doesn't follow as well. So we're trying to kind of, make good practice kind of spread within the broader community of clients. And then, as we look at savings in particular, I guess one of the things we do think is there is just mass under savings within the UK in general. And whilst you can go employer by employer, we do think there is government intervention would be helpful in terms of opt-out savings, and that's certainly something which we're kind of advocates for. In my other role with MyBank, so we've helped around 300,000 young people through collaborations with 1,000 schools, 100 councils, in delivering financial education to a combination of people in schools, but also young people leaving care for the first time, going out into the real world where there's a very high propensity to then become homeless. They come to one of our programs for 5 days. We teach them good money habits, from reading the meter to building your credit score, and again, lots of statistical evidence around how they become homeless less as a result. And again, there we think we are doing a lot of good work, but there are a lot more young people than 300,000 in the UK, and so again, we advocate for kind of broader support for that cause as well. But the 2 things come very hand in hand. We see very poor levels of financial literacy from young people which come into the workforce, and that then just kind of magnifies within the workforce. So we try to tackle it from kind of both sides.
Great, thanks, Asesh. And Lauren?
Sure, yeah. Lauren Langton. Until December last year, I was actually a CEO of a credit union for nearly 5 years. And since January, I've actually gone to work for Incuto, who is a fintech company that actually works with credit unions up and down the country, helping them to help their members with their financial resilience. And of course, we offer a safe home for savings, and when they need it, a good place to get affordable credit. That's what credit unions do. And so we view at Incuto, as well as the credit union sector as a whole, the need to have emergency savings a contingency fund, a safety net, a nest egg. I don't care what you call it. It's all the same thing, but it's absolutely fundamental to, and the core to financial well-being. So working with the credit union sector, who have over 40 years experience of working in communities and employers, addressing financial challenges, providing solutions, actually delivering what we're talking about today. That's why working with the credit union sector is so important to Incuto, and that's why I'm delighted to be here today. We've seen a massive increase in membership in credit unions over the last couple of years, and that's a lot to do with technology. It's making credit unions more accessible to the general public, and it's really, really worked well. However, there is massive potential for our sector to do much more, and we wouldn't take a lot of help if we only had a little bit more help from whoever wants to help us. And I'm glad to say that the minister and the government do what they can. People like the Centre for Social Justice are pointing out what we are doing and how we're filling gaps. This is all really, really important. For me, this is a really underutilised sector of our financial landscape. And in England, we should be ashamed that we haven't got many people as members in our organisations. With respect to the other providers out there for savings, absolutely, we're part of a mutual sector. Building societies, great, salary funds, whatever. I don't mind, as long as people are getting the basics that they need. I think there's a massive underutilisation of credit unions, and I think they would really welcome the opportunity to be part of this savings initiative going forward. So I really hope you do not discount something that is already there, a fantastic vehicle to be used, and with a bit of tweaking could be absolutely phenomenal.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And finally, Jake, and then we'll get to some questions.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake Hatfield. I'm here from Fairfield Finance. Fairfield Finance was founded in 2019. We're funded from dormant assets to focus on improving financial inclusion across the UK, mainly in England. We focus mainly on people in financially vulnerable circumstances. And our initial focus has been on the affordable credit sector. So we are working with Incuto and credit unions, CDFIs and other social fintechs to help to provide investment, but also to provide expertise to help that market to grow. It can grow on its own, it can grow organically and has done. But I think the link, as Lauren says, the link through to mainstream finance to secure that investment, to share expertise, to everybody play together within this landscape, I think there is a huge, huge opportunity. And that's why it's great today to be kind of sharing the platform across with everyone who's here. My background, I've only been with Fairfield Finance since September. Prior to that, I worked with MAPS. We heard from Roxana earlier on, where I worked on the wellbeing strategy for financial wellbeing. And I worked there on the Nation of Savers group, as well as the role of employers in improving financial wellbeing. And prior to that, I was an HR director as well, so hopefully seen some of the challenges from different angles as well.
Great. So lots of enthusiasm on the panel. And yet, so far, only some degree of enthusiasm among the UK's kind of employer population that's actually translated through into behaviours in this space. So I'm going to take the opportunity to sort of probe this a little bit with the panel, and then love to hear questions from our audience here in the room and watching on the stream. Might just start on the supply side with a session, Lauren. Be interested to hear a bit more, firstly, about whether you think there are any barriers on the supply side. So are there things making it harder for you to want to push savings specifically, as opposed to some of the kind of broader financial wellbeing benefits? And then also, at the same time, kind of what are you hearing from employers if you're out there kind of evangelising this space to some degree, and if that take-up kind of isn't coming maybe as fast as we might like to see it, kind of why is that? So maybe Asesh, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'd say there's a few parts to the question. One is, we have been fortunate in that we have a lot of institutional investors behind us. So we have Goldman Sachs, Legal & General, Experian, Royal London, Ben Shalcott. So we've had over £100 million in equity invested to allow us to scale a platform which does a lot of good, and we've lent close to £1 billion now. And so I think in terms of supply of capital, partnership with banks, institutions, I think that's kind of there. Similarly, we're 7 years into technology, and again, we think the kind of technology is now quite kind of well developed. The HR space is very, very fragmented, lots of different systems and so on. And again, we think there's kind of pretty decent kind of middleware that some providers are now building. And then when it comes to employers, they tend to come into two categories: those that really believe in it and are also quite brave, because when you are, I guess, introducing benefits to your employees, it's not necessarily the case that it is in the best interests of everyone. It might be in the best interests of 90%, 95%, but 5% of people, maybe it's not going to be bad. If you save money and actually you're better off investing it, just because you saved it's not a bad thing. But some employers, really struggle with, being, paternalistic or being quite overt about benefits. Others, however, are, believe in it, offer in it, and actually are very vocal in their communications, and they see a lot higher take-up. And so for us, I guess it's just the spectrum of employees in terms of kind of where they sit, and helpfully more and more are in the kind of more active, more kind of brave space. In relation to savings in particular, so we operate at pretty significant scale in the billions, and when you do that, it's important that the money is really secure. And so, as mentioned, we partner with YBS, and that gives us FSCS protection on everyone's savings. And so when you do that, that creates steps in the journey which add friction, but also kind of create protection. And so I think there is definitely opportunity to be able to use FSCS and give employers, employees the benefit and reducing some of the steps there. And then finally, as mentioned before, I think the holy grail is opt-out, in that I think it is going to be a very long journey, employer by employer, getting the case, getting employees to take up, to create fundamental social change, which I think is what is needed. Generation by generation, savings have dropped. There's just not the culture there. And so we think opt-out savings, in the same way as pensions, can actually be very helpful, and we think the broader infrastructure is there. The final comment I was making is we do a lot of research like yourselves with a lot of academic institutions as well, and there's a real difference between people where you're either a planner or a coper. Planners save first, spend later, and guess what? They take up these benefits because it works for them, it's payroll deductive. Where it comes to the copers, their propensity to take these benefits is much lower because they don't plan ahead. And so again, as you look at figures and as you start to get into the detail, the headlines can look great, but when you look at the difference between planners, copers, and some of the statistical significances, again, I think there's a lot more that we could have done. And so I think the ground up should continue. It's gaining momentum. There's a lot of capital, a lot of benefit, but we do think kind of government support top down can be very helpful as well.
Okay, great. And Lauren, just with a sort of credit union hat on, again, same question, kind of what are there barriers from the supply side that you perceive, and are there things on the employer side?
I mean, a lot of credit unions will offer payroll deduction schemes if they've got the resources to manage that in-house. A lot of them haven't. Until recently, credit unions have been volunteer-led largely. However, we've moved on significantly, and certainly using technology and getting a balanced portfolio of customers across a demographic has really de-risked us, and we're looking at lots of ways. So we're much more sophisticated than we used to be, for sure. And we, certainly at Northumberland Community Bank, we were very successful at getting payroll schemes on board. But what the employers thought didn't really come true. So we would hear things like, well, our employees will probably save, but no one will want a loan from you. It's no one will come for a loan. Okay. Well, don't worry about that bit. Just let's join and see what happens. That's rubbish. There's loads of people out there that need small loans and the banks aren't interested. There's no profit in it for them. For credit unions, an average loan might be £700, something like that. There's no profit there. But for credit unions, that's a lifeblood. So we can service that market. And I promise you, there is demand for small loans out there. And if anyone doubts it, goodness me, just look at some figures about doorstep lenders and payroll. Yeah, I mean, it all the evidence is there. As credit unions, though, the more successful we are getting money in on deposits, the nightmare it is for the CEO because we are duty bound to lend it out on loan. And so we've got this dual, we're highly regulated, unlike a lot of people in the market. We are, authorised and registered, the PRA, the FCA. I mean, everyone looks at us like a proper bank, although we don't have those monies. So we have all the downsides, the disadvantages of running a properly run, ethical financial organisation, and all the downsides of massive regulation. And the upside is that that gives protection. Our deposits are covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, absolutely. But more importantly, if we get so much deposits in, and if we were to enter into such a scheme such as this one that we're talking about, there would have to be a recognition that there would have to be some change in regulatory behaviour or something so that it wouldn't upset our ratios. Do you know that's not beyond the wit of man? To me, that's very simple. Credit unions tell me that's a barrier. That's not a barrier. It's just something to work around. That's easy. So I'm not interested in this capital requirement issue anymore. Guy, I hope you're making a note of this because that's rubbish. We shouldn't be talking about that. There's ways around it. I think convincing employers that actually this is very simple. I mean, honestly, we work on a practical spreadsheet. I can't wait to hear from Bupa what they've done because they do it really, really well. The payroll deduction schemes that we've had, that I've been personally involved in, are very simple. Are very simple to run. So I don't really see the admin. It's more of a mentality thing. Roger from TransSave, sorry, Roger, to steal your thunder on this. You might have wanted to say this in a question, but he was talking to me with a cup of tea out there. There was an article recently around HR saying that HR people shouldn't be getting involved in, payroll deductions and savings and, looking after people. For goodness sake, if that goes out in a professional magazine with no counteract to it, credit unions have a hard enough job. For goodness sake, don't throw that one at us as well. I think not-for-profit, we have the same problems as everyone else. We've got no money for marketing. Hardly anyone knows about us. So there's this tiny bit of the financial services that hardly anyone has heard of still. That's ridiculous. So I think for scaling up, we've got those problems, but none of them are insurmountable. None of them. The people in this room could make a massive difference overnight to that. So let's get on and do it.
You can see why it's quite useful having a
I have to say the idea of it's not a barrier, it's just something to work around. I absolutely is the very definition of positive mental attitude. So I love that. So I'm going to do a quick question to each of our other two panelists, and then I'll throw it open. So Katie, I mean, we've had conversations with you about opt-out models, and I guess one of the to try and make a distinction, and come back to some of Melissa's question. What's stopping employers doing payroll savings? Well, maybe not that much, but is it a bit harder moving to an opt-out model? So I should be interested in what have your reflections been about, is this something we could do, and what might stop us or help us get over the line of doing that?
And I think there's probably two aspects to that. One is the kind of the internal pressure points of making sure that the business case is there. When we launched our earned wage access, there was a very clear business case because the nursing sector was so competitive. We needed that to help us encourage nurses to work with us and not with somebody else. What we find now is that and I would imagine this would happen as well with opt-out, is that as more employers do it in such a buoyant employment market, as people move from one employer to another, they're going to ask that question at recruitment: why don't you do X? You know, whatever benefits they enjoyed at their last employer. So I think there's an element of getting your actual company in that space, and then I think the engagement is a massive thing. So having the technology that is completely friction free, that we do everything now in a couple of taps. You know, if it's putting a film on Netflix, booking our holiday, buying a bikini for that holiday, whatever, we're doing it in a couple of taps. We're not filling out long forms, and that is exactly the way that we should be pushing benefits to our employees, is on that consumer grade experience, so that you're then getting more membership. And I think what we found with across our benefits that do really well is when you've got advocacy in our care homes, in our dental practices, where you get that, you know, that kind of peer alignment. Oh, they're doing great with that. They love the fact that they've got a savings pot. They love the fact that they've got whatever. So I think you only get that when you've got that friction-free experience.
Great, fantastic, thank you. And Jake, so Fair for All Finance, among other things, we're very focused on the lending side of financial well-being and access to affordable credit and things. And when we spoke in the sort of pre-meet that we had about this session, we sort of touched on the sort of conflict for just airspace in the whole financial well-being discussion. Can you just say a bit more about that? Do you think that's a barrier here as well, that no one's quite sure where to go first?
I think the key thing is to provide people with choices, and I think that depends on what situation everyone's in. So having choices that reflect the moments that matter in people's lives is really important. And I think employers probably know more about us than any other one institution. You know, we work with employers every day for years and years and years, and I think employers have a kind of implicit responsibility to support their workers. And I also think that's quite an important distinction to say workers rather than employees. Employees are probably on long contracts and get benefits automatically, but there are lots of people in the UK who are workers, gig workers, precarious employment, who we also need to think about supporting as well, and that kind of fits more within kind of our remit, people who are maybe a bit more financially less resilient. So I think it's good to hear from Bupa and hear from big employers who do have the ability to engage with third parties, to engage with the likes of Salary Finance on a large scale. But we also need solutions for the rest of society as well. Maybe specifically on the credit side of things, I think it's really challenging for people to think about savings if they're in problem debt. I think if they're in problem debt, then they need to get specialist advice, and again, MAPS are here as the funder of that in the UK. But I think it is possible, and I think it should be more widely known that it's possible to save and borrow at the same time. This is, fundamentally the credit union model, which is really, really positive. You can borrow, you can pay back those loans, but you can save at the same time. And I think the earlier panel as well talked about that being habit forming and the strength of the habits that are formed through that process as well. So that's something we really support. We want that kind of holistic solution for financial resilience. But it kind of needs to be personal to the person as well. So I think maybe that's the big challenge, is that everyone has a unique experience.
Great. I've got about a million more questions I could ask, but I want to make sure that others have a chance too. So I'm going to throw it open to the audience in just a second. I think we've got a couple of questions from the live stream. One thing I would just say, we do have a couple of other employers in the audience who we heard from earlier who've been through some of this thinking. We've got a couple of other savings providers in the audience, so really open to questions, but also really open to kind of any additional observations on this kind of absolutely core question, kind of what would get more employers doing this being both offering payroll savings, but also considering offering them on an opt-out basis. So let's have some questions and also some observations we may get in. And I'm going to start with Michelle, who's got a question from the live audience, which she can't say in the mic.
Either I'm very unreliable or this microphone is. I think it's the microphone, we'll see. There was a question actually from earlier in the day asking, does anyone here have experience of doing this kind of thing with small employers, or do you know of it, or do you have any reflections on how difficult this would be for small or micro employers?
Okay, just to repeat that for the streaming audience, in case the mic didn't come through. So the question was, does anyone here have any experience of trying to offer this kind of thing to smaller employers, and/or any insight or observations about potential barriers that may be different at the smaller employer level? So I'll turn to my panel and see who. There's lots of nodding. So Asesh, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, we've spent we've generally gone with the approach where if we can get it right for the big employers, where there is a high return per employer, and then we can use that to fund the technology, we can then develop an operating model which works at a much lower level. And so we're in the process of partnering with a couple of big HR providers which focus on SME. They reach about 6 million people between them, organisations which have 6 million across hundreds of thousands of SMEs. And I think the HR technology sector is now at a level of advancement where there is consolidation happening, which means that through these platforms you can then give access to SMEs at scale in a way which is kind of much easier. And so even that will be 10 employees upwards. And so there's obviously lots in the 10 to 1, which I think is a next opportunity. But I think there is now, you can't necessarily for us go to SMEs one by one, but we can do it en masse through their existing providers as an add-on. And so I think evolution is kind of taking us there in the next direction.
Great. And
well, certainly credit unions up and down the country deal with very small employers, 10 staff, 20 staff. It doesn't actually matter. In fact, for us, I would say it's more important that we offer that to the smaller employers, or just as important. So we should never forget that. Definitely, it's doable. It's doable.
And I mean, Jake, we talked a bit about this again on the call, and you were wearing the hat of an HR manager. So, I mean, particularly, I guess, in terms of the capacity on the employer side, is there anything else you'd add?
So, I mean, the organisation where I ran the HR department was, 700 people, but by the time I left, 350 people. I don't think it was a correlation. But we had quite a complex and integrated benefits package. A combination of DC and DB pensions, a well-being calendar where we focused on financial well-being stuff. But we also had the people to support that in the HR function, good sponsorship from non-HR managers as well, and the board. So I don't think it can be underestimated. I think, I guess, once these things are up and running, once the products are developed, then they can be friction-free. But the thought process in creating the environment where organisations want to think about that versus their business priorities, understand why it's important to them, why it's important to the employees, and therefore why it makes business sense to make those kind of decisions. I don't think it should be underestimated. I think it's worth it, and probably everyone on the panel and most people in the room, I mean, they're here, so they probably believe it as well, but not everybody does. And so I think we shouldn't underestimate that it takes a bit of mental gymnastics to get everybody on the same page.
And really, it's a staged process. You don't have to have the gold plated from day one. Do something rather than nothing. I think that's what I would say. Yes, if you go to a small company and say, what's your financial, well-being agenda, what's your policy, goodness me. But if you say, do you want to help your staff save very easily? I mean, they're going to say, yes, let's have it bite-sized chunks. Again, it's just doing something rather than nothing.
Yeah, and I think if I could just put my panellist hat on for a minute, and there's going to be a question in the back, so I'm coming to you next. But if I put my panellist hat on for a minute, I guess it was mentioned earlier on as well that the payroll sector may have a role to play here. That's certainly proved to be massively true in the implementation of pensions auto-enrolment, kind of getting the payroll sector on side. And I also think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Katie, but I think it's probably common between your case and Michelle's that already having a payroll integrated benefits platform of some kind that you were working with made the step towards savings on that platform maybe a little bit more straightforward. Is that a fair comment? Or
I mean, there's always work involved in it. Ultimately, I suppose what gets a little bit disheartening is because once you've set the pipeline up, the hard work is done. But then when there's very few people using that pipeline, it feels almost like it's expended effort for not an awful lot of benefit. So the engagement and again the enrolment process being super straightforward is really key, and then it feels like it's worthwhile investment, and the ROI is there.
Great, really helpful. Thank you. So there's a question at the back. and then one next.
Amy Bell from Willis Towers Watson. I think from an employer's perspective, there are lots of providers who can offer those types of savings options for employers to choose from. So I think there's quite a lot of different options out there already. And I think some of the conversations that I have with employers are around things like, one is the portability, so the turnover of employees, how easy is it for them as individuals to take their savings elsewhere, a bit like the problems we have with pensions. But I think as well and I'd be interested to know, for those who have put in place opt-outs and have high take-up rates, with those savings, how many of those accounts remain dormant? So people don't actually go in and access those savings. What happens to that over time if they're invested in cash, for example? And so it's considerations like that I think employers are thinking about. How much do they have to continue to monitor those providers or those investment options like they would, with pensions? So sort of some observations.
Yeah, no observations are very welcome. Those were really good. I mean, I guess just looking to the employers, and I'm going to look at Katie and at Michelle, that question about worrying about job turnover and people leaving accounts behind, is that something that you've thought about, encountered at all?
Well, let me be a little bit blunt here. The more problems that an employer helps a person solve in their life, the more likely that person is going to stay with that employer. So to a certain extent, putting benefits in place that create stickiness, if you like, and help that person resolve their life is going to help them stay where they are, and then that knowledge stays in that organisation thrives, and the person then thrives because that organisation can offer more benefits. So, again, we've always got to be in a position, because we're not legally mandated to do these kinds of things, where there is a business imperative to do that. I don't know whether Michelle's got a view, but I think it's probably a little bit early to start looking at whether there's any trends in dormant accounts at this point.
Yeah, well,
just for the mic. Thank you.
I've done a little bit of research just looking at the data before this meeting today, and very few are dormant. The default has either stayed the same or increased. They've just gone in and increased it themselves. So very, very few have been paused.
Yeah, we've seen in a slightly longer running case in the opt-in model in the JARS trial, something very similar. As Joe showed earlier, generally speaking, we're not seeing these accounts get closed or kind of left behind, but it is, as you say, quite early days. If anyone's wondering, by the way, the reason we're passing a microphone around the room that isn't making any noise is for the live streaming at home. So it is serving a purpose, even though you can't hear it in the room. So I think Andrew had a question at the back, so sorry, Michelle, I'm going to send you straight back to the other end of the room.
Hi, thanks. Andrew Gore from the Building Society Association.
Speak up.
From the Building Society Association, a number of our members are actively looking at the business case for this, and this is a key issue. And so, just a question for Asesh and Lauren, really. When you approach employers, is it easy to get in and have that initial conversation, or do you get ignored? And if you do have that initial conversation, when they say no, what are the reasons? Or once you're in, is the battle essentially won?
Yeah, so it's changed over the years. As when we started 7 years ago, financial wellness was not really a very well developed term. No employers were really doing it. At that point, we would go into companies, and the honest answer is this, which is we would pick a CEO who genuinely felt guilty about the difference between his executives' lives and those of the working people in their organisation. And so we would go to them and say, look, it's fantastic that if you have debt, you pay 4%, but the reality for your employees is very different. Through these models, we can help equalise the access. And the sell was more emotional rather than kind of data driven. Then kind of what happened is in these organisations, so Dunelm was one of our first retail clients in the UK. The data is very compelling, based upon the work we've done with Harvard. Our users are 28% more likely to stay with their employer relative to the rest of the population. That then leads to positive case studies. We then win the big first supermarket, and now we're live in 9 of the 10 biggest supermarkets in the UK. And each one helps you win the next one because the evidence base is stronger. And today where we are is actually quite different, which is the market's more developed. So it's not so much a question around is financial wellness a good thing. It's kind of there's a spectrum of things you could do now. Kind of what is the right thing for my for my employees. So it's very much changed over time. So I'd say the evidence base now is pretty strong. employers that do it are pretty unanimously happy. Now it's kind of, different employers want to put their own slant, own emphasis on it. So it's just kind of how they go about approaching it. So the market has evolved quite a lot over that period.
Well, I don't think any credit unions have masses of companies knocking on the door. I can tell you that. I might be wrong, so I would say from the credit union's point of view, it takes quite a bit of hard work, and it's that local knowledge that's probably the winner, the community based. And of course, you've got to remember where the great advantages of the credit unions is that they are predominantly local, and a lot of employers like that. For example, in Northumberland, we had big employers like the Health Authority and the County Council, and equally we had small 20 employees, and I think that's brilliant, the fact that they all have access to it. It's not easy. But it's, as Ashley says, there's a different vibe around things now. We just need to get it over the line.
I think the Minister had a question.
Yeah, sure. I better wait. Have I got to wait for the microphone as well? I can boom it, but
Yes.
I've got to wait.
So, I mean, just addressing the point about what are called small pots and
Legacy pots. I don't think that's a problem personally, for 3 reasons. The first is this is diverted
pay. It's not money you're giving.
extra pay or anything like that. So it is an entitlement to the employee, and the bank account is in the employee's name. It's not a question of this is a bank account held by the business, which of course is the problem we have in respect of a pension. So I really don't see that, and in fact, the evidence that I've seen certainly is that where an employee moves on from a company is a simple matter of HR saying, well, goodbye, this is your holiday entitlement that is as yet unaccrued, but also here's the fact you've got this bank account, and the bank account continues, but we're just not going to pay into it anymore. So the practical reality is it's up to the employee to then track down their own bank account. And in my experience, that people are much, much better at dealing with savings accounts than they are with pensions. Partly because, of course, the pension system, as we've done AE, is not as simple as it should be. The bit that, two questions I've got for the panel would be, is it better that the employer can
Put their own stamp on this in terms of that there is this is a boot special or a Suez special or whatever, or is it better if government steps in because we always know best and says you've got to do this and this is what it looks like, which is frankly what we do with automatic enrolment. So that's kind of the learning I'd really like to know on that. And I still don't think we're really getting to the nuts and bolts of
why lots of employers are not doing this, because I take your point totally, but there is
the grit in the system actually helps keep the employee, which is actually what you want. It's just the same with the midlife MOT.
but the grit in the system is actually the problem for the employer because it's blooming complicated to get them signed up for this. Trust me, anyone who's tried to run one, which Lauren and I did for 5 years, getting people to sign up to payroll is a nightmare, an utter nightmare. It may be getting better, so how do we make that process better? And my final thing, this is your wind up,
Is the data's woeful on this. It really is. So
the truth is, I'm reliably informed that Salary Finance have got lots of customers. I don't know who they are. Nest have got lots of customers. I didn't know Boots did this, and I've been doing this job 4 years and 11 months.
Booper.
There you go.
Get the name right.
So my point being, getting, I still, over 50% of the FTSE 100 didn't bother replying to me. Just not interested at all. Getting that data and then actually understanding who does what in this space would be a very good job for Nest and MAPS in particular to drive forward, and my team will help very much on that basis, because at the moment it's just not there.
There's a lot of questions. You're going to have to divert.
Well, I'm going to sum that up as two really helpful comments. And by the way, I absolutely agree on the data. But I think the most questiony question in there was about kind of, is it better for every employer to do their own flavour of this, or is it better for the government to tell them what the flavour looks like a bit closer to what's happened in the retirement space? So I mean, maybe perhaps we'll start with UKT, but then let's hear from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, and I think it depends what outcome you want. You know, I think if an employer is really close to the sentiment of its people and can really communicate that sentiment, then the enrolment is good. You know, again, if I use the wage stream case study for us, It is our most enrolled product. So we've got 8,000 of our people out of 23,000 people that have enrolled for that. The communication on it was really quite light touch, but the app does it for you because it's just the complete friction-free consumer-grade app. The fintech investment, I suppose, has really got to be confronted if we're looking at smaller employers that might not have access to either outsourcing that to a third party or developing that internally. But that's what Joe Public expects now. They expect that real, 1 or 2 clicks. If they're clicking more than 6 or 7 times for anything, even a Google search, they're done. The attention span is finished. So if you can capture that sweet spot, then that's the trick. And then you're not putting somebody in a position where they're being forced. Because there's still, I am very on the fence about the government actually mandating in this space, in so much as it does create an element of that sense of being forced, that sense of being forced into that space.
There are 10 million people out there who haven't got savings, and that's what the government's got to worry about. So I love the fact that
Absolutely.
I'm conservative. Choice is great. Bottom line is this: the great British public are not saving enough.
So, Sacha, do you have a...
Yeah, I was going to say, let's be clear, this is a massive social problem. So forget the employer part. Depending on the research you read, between 1 in 3 and 2 in 3 people don't have emergency savings here and in the US. That's a huge social problem. If that wasn't there, the employer's bit would be irrelevant. It's only relevant because it's a vehicle to solve a social problem. If there are other vehicles, brilliant. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be many other vehicles to solve this social problem. I think the employers have a role. Edelman do a lot of research when you rank government, media, non-profits, others in who you trust most. People trust their employer, they appear at the top. And so I think there is this kind of quasi-structural benefit in payroll. There's this trust benefit. There's a good way to kind of get comms out. So I think to solve a social problem, employers are a vehicle, a pretty good one, and there's some decent evidence that it works. And so I think it is a decent vehicle to get that. Without it, absolutely, there'll be good examples, innovators, all that type of stuff. But if you want to dent the 10, 15 million, whatever the number is, I think there is a role for government. It doesn't have to be via employers, it could be a different way, but there is definitely a way. And like I say, for my bank hat, where we do a lot of work with young people, financial education in schools is also woefully inadequate. And I think, again, there is another role for government there, so people understand the role of savings, that you should be saving 10% of your pay. Just a basic rule of life. Everyone should know it. And so I think there is a big role for government.
And we've got one more question here, but I just make one observation about this. I was talking to someone about this on the way over this morning. I think there's sometimes an assumption when we talk about barriers and who can do what to remove them, that we're always talking about implementing the pensions mandate type model that everyone suddenly has to move towards enrollment. But actually, if you take Tim's example from the US, that regulatory bit of paper that says, for the avoidance of doubt, if you are worried about it, this is not illegal for you to do the opt-out version of the auto-enrollment version. It may be that there are steps like that which are actually, maybe easier to implement, that would actually be profoundly impactful at the employer decision-making level, because as we heard from Michelle, they did have to go through that process of, is this legal? Can we do this? Is it an illegal deduction from pay? So it's possible there are some sort of easier middle grounds to encourage the innovation in this space. I think we're all kind of keen to see. But there was a question in the second row there.
Thank you. I was wondering whether we would hear anything today about the gig economy. I was seeing some figures last week indicating that employers are expecting the number of technical employees to be declining over the next few years, and the number of people engaged with companies in one way or another without is going to be increasing. So this is a challenge which needs to be, I think, taken on board, because you'll be dealing with fewer and fewer people if you stick just with technical employees.
It's a great question. Who would like to? James?
I completely agree. And I think, was it Ian from the University of Lincoln mentioned earlier on about multiple employments as well. So you've got the gig economy with that kind of precarious income, lumpy income, as it's sometimes called as well. I mean, that puts the onus on the worker then, so we're back to the definition of worker rather than employee. making a decision to automatically take some savings off some income that might not be very regular. But also on the flip side, on the employer side, which I think could be a challenge as well, is where there are multiple employers, then who takes the responsibility? We're talking about employers taking responsibility for financial well-being of their workers. Well, if a worker's working for 2, 3, 4 different employers, that kind of becomes distributed. I think it makes it hard to legislate for as well. I mean, it's not an easy challenge. So I think there are lots of challenges there, especially the way it's moving. And again, that's why we need that kind of flexibility in the suite of solutions that we come up with.
But the providers, if you have an account with the credit union, it doesn't matter who you work for, it just gets, the money gets diverted. So, I think that has to be in the mix as well, because there's a lot of people have different sets of incomes, and they do different things with the different income streams. That's one way of budgeting as well. You use that child benefit and all that sort of thing. There's different ways of looking at it, and that's one of the many advantages of the credit union. It's a relationship between the provider, the credit union, and the person, no matter where they work or how they get their income.
And completely transferable as well.
And completely transferable, absolutely. And that gives the ownership and everything to the person, which I think is essentially right. But there's lots of ways to skin a cat, and I think that is part of the mix.
So we've got time for one more question, and it's just in the corner there.
Hi, Gemma Burrows from Willis Towers Watson. It's great to hear the enthusiasm from the panel, and I think we spoke earlier on, it's very evident that financial wellbeing is important, and there is a bit of a crisis around that at the moment. Do we have any data or evidence on how these solutions are improving financial well-being? Because I think if we can nod to that, employers are aware of how financial well-being impacts productivity. So if we can see some hard data around the improvement that these solutions are making, maybe they'd be more inclined to kind of take that leap.
So, Sesh, you've done a lot of work. Sorry, Katie, you go ahead. And then...
I was just going to say, from the work that we've done around insulating people from those unexpected bills and giving them opportunities and choices about how they address that, I think our pre-launch, I feel stressed in the workplace, I think was the exam question, was towards 70% and is down to nearer 40% now. So that's kind of over a 2-year period. I think I'm getting those numbers right, but it's off the top of my head. But we can definitely see a correlation. And for us, that's really important because these are people that potentially are giving one-to-one care and administering medication. We don't want them distracted. We absolutely want them to be stress-free in the workplace.
Did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done, a number of independent studies. Providers will be accused of cutting data in ways we work with us. So, based on independent studies we've done 2. One which looks at a randomly selected set of employers, and then they've looked at employees that use one of our services versus that don't, and there's a pretty clear correlation in terms of retention. And so employers can form, particularly post, with the Great Resignation of things, pretty strong financial case in terms of reducing attrition as a result. The second thing we do internally, and actually the US is a lot more developed in this space, is just analysing the credit reports of our users month to month, and then you can see how the credit score improves, indebtedness increases. We have 3% of people that are buying their first house that they ordinarily wouldn't have been able to, and so a combination of AV data from employers, users, non-users, together with trend analysis on credit reports can give you a pretty decent picture.
Yeah, I'd only add that trying to answer that question, so can you actually measure the financial wellness impact of these things is a big part of the program evaluation we're trying to do. It is hard because getting the data, survey data, you have response rate issues, credit score data, you have kind of GDPR and access issues, but that is where we're trying to go with a lot of our research, because I think that's absolutely the essential question.
There's also, just at that kind of macro level, so the Financial Capability Survey indicated that up to 6 million people per year will experience a life event that will lead to an income shock. So that's kind of scale at that macro level. And then if people had £1,000 in savings, or a household had £1,000 in saving, it reduced their need for debt advice by 50%. So you can then imagine what that might have on mental well-being and the impact on how they react at work, etc. So as it's difficult to measure, but there are other kind of macro stats where it's not a huge reach to work out how that would impact people.
Brilliant. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for on this panel. I'd like to thank my excellent panellists. And we've now got another short break, and then we'll come back together to wrap up at about 4 o'clock. So thank you very much. Okay. If we could just quieten down and we will. Okay, well, thanks everyone for rejoining just for this last wrap-up session of the day. For those watching the live stream at home who may not have seen the last-minute change in schedule, you will have noticed that I am not the Minister for Pensions, for which my apologies. We shifted the agenda around a little bit, and he spoke earlier on, so we're now back with me to do a bit of a kind of wrap-up of the day. So I said at the start of today, the whole topic of workplace emergency saving has been one that Nest Insight got interested in almost from kind of day one, really, when we launched in 2016, and has been a very big part of our lives for the last several years now. So it's been great today to bring together what we've been doing and the research that we've done so far, to reflect on the findings from that and put it in the context of other people's research and of the kind of real experience on the ground of employers and providers who are kind of working in this space. And to think more about how we do get this stuff to scale up. You know, the Minister was saying there are several million people in the UK who simply don't have enough of a financial buffer to deal with, call it a rainy day, call it an emergency. So kind of that focus in the room on how do we get that stuff to scale up has been really positive. So just to recap a bit, in the first panel, so we heard from Tim about the evidence from the US and from the various different arms of BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative, and then from Roxana about what we've seen in some different UK contexts, and then finally on the evidence side from Joe, who delved in a bit more detail into what we're hearing kind of from actual users of the JARS tool and how they're benefiting from it. And I do find it's really, you know, so the data is important and the kind of quant evidence is important, but those case studies, those kind of actual personal use cases of this kind of thing can be so powerful in helping us to then think about what that kind of quant data is telling us. I thought that was great to hear. I'm going to take the opportunity to repeat something I said opening earlier, which is just kind of what I think of as the sort of story here, and that's kind of where we are so far. So we know lots of employers are getting interested in workplace financial well-being and savings as a part of that, and we had a lot of enthusiasm in the second panel, and I thought some really kind of positive indicators from Asesh, who was saying, you know, we feel like maybe there's a bit of a tipping point in employer interest and demand in this space. We know employees want these products. We hear that from surveys all over the place, surveys in the UK, surveys in the US. We increasingly know that the people who get around to using these tools benefit from them. And that question about, you know, are we measuring the financial well-being impact? So we are measuring them, and we are starting to get that evidence base that says, you know, people do genuinely benefit. They are financially healthier, and that leads to mental health benefits, productivity benefits if they're taking up these tools. But, and there are these two kind of big kind of buts around this, we know that there are some things holding employers back from taking these things up, from offering them kind of at the level that it might be good to see them offering them. And we know that even where they do, there's this intention behaviour gap between what people say about the potential for them to find these tools useful and to benefit from them and what they actually do in terms of taking them up. And it was, you know, I think it was really great today to see both evidence that take-up problem is common. So we all, you know, we are all kind of working from the same challenge here. Albeit that, you know, also good to see there are these individual cases where, if the conditions are right, that kind of organic take-up can get to higher levels. And it was great to hear those two case studies about opt-out models kind of in the wild, to see, you know, actual examples of employers who shifted the default to make saving the opt-out, and to start to hear kind of some of the evidence about what those are showing, and that number that Joe used, you know, 40% people remaining in so far in the Suez trial, as compared to a base case of maybe 4 or 5 or 6% of people joining voluntarily. You know, that I mean, it's very early data. We've got a long way to go, but that's the sort of holy grail data piece that we've all been kind of waiting for, I think. And so I'm hearing that is really positive. And I think also hearing from Joe and from Tim that at least so far, there is no evidence that creates a problem on the pensions auto-enrollment side. You know, so we're not seeing this kind of feared cannibalization problem, where if you enroll people into an emergency savings tool, you know, does that sort of somehow foreground the fact that they're also saving for retirement? Does it make them choose between those two things? Is there a fixed pie, as Tim put it? You know, we're not seeing that, and that's really, really important, I think, in helping us. You know, I was saying to someone in the break, I personally have been working on pensions auto-enrollment for nearly 20 years, I don't want to do anything that's going to undermine it. And I don't think anyone does. It's like this great success story of UK public policy. So starting to see the data that says maybe we don't need to be so worried about that is really exciting, and it's been great to hear that today. And then in the second panel, we did come on and sort of talk about these kind of barriers from the employer's perspective. And I think it was great that there was a lot of enthusiasm on the panel for why this is important. But of course, we have to remember that kind of by definition, the people who come to an event like this and be on one of these panels are the enthusiasts and are the advocates and are the people who will want to be kind of positive. And I think, in spite of that, we did, I think, start to get into an understanding of, well, what are some of the hurdles here? What makes this difficult for providers to push the scale? What makes it difficult for employers to necessarily want to take it up? And so I think we are just left with these two questions that we now need to kind of keep working on and keep building the evidence base around. So that is, what will help overcome the barriers for employers so that more of them do this, and ideally, I think, do this on the opt-out model, not the opt-in model. And then at the employee level, with opt-outs likely a big part of the answer, how to continue to close that intention behaviour gap. There is just one more topic I wanted to touch on briefly before I close, because of course, since we started looking at this stuff, sort of two big things have happened, right? The pandemic has happened, and now more recently, the sort of set of cost of living challenges that we know people are facing have become much more kind of visible in people's minds. And kind of at one level, that's reinforced the importance of financial resilience and the importance of having savings. But it probably has also made it harder for some people to start, so it has made it harder for some people to start saving, and we sort of begin to hear a little bit this question, kind of what's the point in pushing workplace emergency savings right now? Is this just kind of too hard? Should we think about it another time? And this is something we've sort of talked a lot about within the team, and Michelle, my colleague, posted a blog about it last week, just sort of talking about some of our views on this topic, and Joe talked about it a bit as well. We aren't saying, and I don't think anyone in this room is saying, that workplace emergency savings is for 100% of people. Right? There will be lots of people, more people than in the case of workplace pension saving probably, for whom it's not the right thing, kind of either now or at all. And that might be because they've got accessible savings covered sort of somewhere else in their portfolio, or it might genuinely be because right now it's not affordable for them, it's not something they feel that they can be doing. But for us, I think nonetheless, kind of there's never been a more important moment to be thinking about how to help people with financial resilience, because this is the moment when people's financial resilience is at its most stretched. And so it would be a shame to kind of lose sight of what are all the things we can do and think about that help those who will benefit from it to access it, whilst making sure that you don't capture the wrong people and making sure that there's the right flexibility in the tools and the products that people use. It's kind of worth saying that, and Joe, you again touched on this, kind of historically, almost any intervention that's about prompting or encouraging more people to save comes with the concern or the assertion that for some people it won't be affordable. Look at savings gateway pilots here, look at the introduction of automatic enrolment here, and also in the US. And yet, kind of the evidence that we see suggests that when people are given the right support, kind of not only do people often exceed their own expectations for how much they can save, and this was a point that Tim was making, but they also find that hugely empowering, right? And it starts to build habits and it starts to build opportunity. And I think those case studies that Joe was showing, that sort of bumping along the bottom case study, which I think kind of initially you look at and you think, was this someone who shouldn't have been saving? Because they're not accumulating a balance, and isn't saving all about accumulating a balance. But then you think about this kind of mindset shift, savings as a verb, not saving as a noun, right? So this idea that saving is a thing you do and that might help you with cash flow budgeting and management is a really powerful use case, and perhaps one that's particularly relevant now for people who might be struggling with kind of day-to-day money matters. So for us, I think this is really all about developing the tools in the right way and thinking about the right cases, but definitely not kind of backing away from thinking of this as a challenge that we should be working on and working hard on to solve. So in the light of all of that, I hope today's event has served as a kind of stock take for people to bring our work and that of others that's been done over the last few years as this topic has become more of a mainstream one, together all in one place, and to socialise that evidence and to reinforce that demand is there for these tools, reinforce a sense of what's working well. I will, with that in mind, just do a quick plug to say people here and on the stream who aren't aware, we have published now really quite a number of reports in this space. We've done that over the last 3 or 4 years, available at the Nest Insight website. We published another report this morning which talks in more depth about some of the stuff that Joe was presenting in terms of some of those use cases of the JARS tool. So please do go there to see that evidence base and kind of help us think about where more evidence is needed, as the Minister was challenging us on today. I think that more evidence question is really important. I think making sure the data is there to inform kind of decision making and progress is vital. So we definitely want to hear your ideas on that. We're hugely excited about our ongoing work in this area and the extension of our relationship with BlackRock, which we think will allow us to do a huge amount more. And on that note, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Sarah Melvin, who is the head of BlackRock here in the UK, to close the event. And once Sarah's finished, I hope you will stay and grab another quick coffee with us and have a bit more time for networking. But for now, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Will, and good afternoon, everyone. As Will said, my name is Sarah Melvin. I'm privileged to lead BlackRock in the UK. And at BlackRock, we are incredibly proud of our partnership with Nest and Nest Insight. Our organisation's missions are really closely aligned and anchored in a shared commitment to improve financial well-being in the UK. It's why we're delighted to fund, through our foundation and charitable trust, Nest Insight's research into those solutions that help build financial safety nets for those most in need. As Will, in fact, just said, even before the pandemic, Nest Insight research showed that 1 in 4 UK adults didn't have enough savings to pay for an unexpected bill of £300. And when we talk about this in our organisation, you can see people thinking, that's the new washing machine. If I can't replace the washing machine, what would I do? And with the cost of living increasing, this issue's never been more important, nor the risk higher. And there are still significant barriers to overcome, and it's why we're extending our support to Nest Insight for the next 3 years, to continue building and deepening that crucial evidence base to enable more emergency savings programs to be rolled out by employers across the country. Today, I know everyone here has had the opportunity to hear extensively about the incredible work Nest Insight and its partners are driving forward. And I think the research and work covered today really speak to Nest's DNA, pioneering, innovative, and rooted in social purpose. I'm given the great task of closing today and actually saying some thank yous, because always many people are involved in making events like this possible. And so it's a huge thank you to everyone who put together today's event. I hope you all agree it's been a fantastic afternoon. Thank you to everyone at Nest Insight for your tireless work on emergency savings. Will and team, today I think is a testament to you and the work you're doing to improve financial resilience and the financial well-being of the UK's working population. And to the panellists and moderators, thank you for your insightful contributions on such an important topic. I also want to thank all the employers and delivery partners who've made the research trials possible. We know it's not easy, and I hope that you're all incredibly proud of the work you're doing and the impact it's having on your employees, clients, and the community at large. Finally, thanks to all of you who are here in person today and all of those of you watching it live on stream. We know that you all have many demands on your time and really appreciate your contributions and your commitment to this crucial mission. And so with that, maybe I can invite everyone in the room to come and join us for a coffee, and thanks again.